Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. The interstate threaded through the prairie like a dark river, its twin streams of asphalt disappearing into miles of low, rolling fog. It was the hour when most of the world slept, those pale minutes past midnight when even the moon seemed tired, and the stars retreated behind a woolen ceiling of cloud. On that long, empty stretch of highway, the only certainty was the hum of tires on faded paint and the faint, steady vibration of a diesel engine pushing through the quiet. Evan Mercer had been driving since late afternoon, his rig, a weathered blue Peterbilt with a silver stripe, pulling a refrigerated trailer humming softly behind him. The trailer glowed faintly in his mirrors whenever his taillights caught its edges, like a ghost following dutifully behind. The air outside was damp, the kind of chill that seeped into the cab no matter how high the heater was turned. The fog had started as a low, harmless mist at dusk, hanging in the ditches and shallow fields, but as the night deepened, it had swollen and climbed, swallowing fence posts, road signs, and the distant silhouettes of grain elevators. Inside the cab, the world was reduced to a small, luminous island. The dash lights cast a soft emerald glow over Evan's hands, the steering wheel, and the coffee-stained thermos in the cup holder. The radio, turned low, played a station so weak that the music dissolved into static every few minutes, then found itself again with surprising clarity. An old song faded in and out, the singer's voice occasionally replaced by the faint hiss of atmospheric noise, like someone breathing through the wires. He watched the white center line slip beneath the truck like a hypnotist's watch on a chain. Every so often, the reflective paint flared in the beams of his headlights, then vanished into the gray. There were no other vehicles in sight, no pinpricks of approaching headlights on the opposite lane, no red taillight glow ahead. Just the long, straight road, the fog, and the faint echo of a guitar riff fighting through weak radio waves. Somewhere around mile marker 214, the fog thickened. It moved in odd, layered veils, drifting across the highway in slow, shifting sheets. The high beams made it worse, turning the world ahead into a white wall, so Evan dropped the lights back down and eased off the throttle. The speedometer dipped below the limit, the needle hovering there, his foot feathering the pedal out of habit. The CB radio sat quiet on the dash, its little orange display a steady, patient eye. Most nights it offered the comfort of distant voices, bad jokes, weather warnings, fragments of conversations between strangers sharing the same dark roads. Tonight it had been unusually silent. Earlier in the evening, he had caught scraps of chatter about a jackknife truck 2 states over, some debate on gas prices, and a brief, good-natured argument about the best midnight diner along the route. Then, as dusk extinguished the last color from the sky, the airwaves had gone still. Evan's eyelids felt grainy, his shoulders tight from hours of sitting. The familiar drowsiness of the long haul brushed at the edges of his mind, but it hadn't quite settled. The fog helped with that. It demanded attention. Shapes seemed to loom in it, only to dissolve when the headlights reached them. Bushes became crouched figures and then nothing. Fence posts became watchful sentinels, then only dark smudges receding into the rear view. He reached for his thermos, unscrewed the cap with one hand, and took a long sip. The coffee inside was lukewarm, bitter, slightly metallic. He preferred it that way on late drives. The shock of it was gentler but still enough to keep him awake. It was then, with the thermos halfway back to its place, that the sound came. A crackle, like dry leaves underfoot, whispered from the CB speaker. It was so soft at first that Evan almost missed it, mistaking it for the rustle of his jacket sleeve. Then it grew, expanding into a low, grainy static that rolled through the cab like a sigh. He set the thermos down, his eyes still on the road, and reached for the volume knob. The CB had been on but quiet, turned down low. He raised the volume slowly. The static increased, an airy, whispering noise that ebbed and flowed as if something were trying to push through from very far away. "Anyone out there?" The voice, when it finally emerged, was faint and stretched thin, as though dragged across miles of empty space. It sounded distant and tired. The words broke apart in the static, more suggestion than speech. Evan leaned slightly forward without meaning to, his heartbeat giving an inexplicable little hitch. The road ahead narrowed into a corridor of light, the fog thick on either side like walls. There was still no sign of another vehicle. He glanced at the CB, at the little glowing numbers indicating the channel 19, the standard. He hesitated only a second before pressing the transmit button on the hand mic. "Breaker 19, he said, his voice sounding oddly loud in the muted cab. "Got you coming through real weak. You and some kind of trouble, driver." He released the button. The static dipped as if taking a breath, then rose again, roiling quietly. "Late behind, can't see." Fragments of words emerged, blurring at the edges. The tone of the voice was difficult to place, flattened and distorted by distance and interference. It might have been male, it might have been female. It sounded like someone speaking from the other side of a thick door. Evan swallowed. His eyes flicked to the small digital clock embedded in the dash. 12:37 a.m. The seconds ticked forward, indifferent. "Your signal's rough," he said, thumb pressing the mic button again. "Where you at? What mile marker you running?" Silence, except for the soft drum of rain beginning to dust the windshield. He hadn't noticed the clouds settling lower, the damp intensifying. The wipers squeaked once as he tapped their control, then fell into a slow, rhythmic motion, brushing away a sheen of moisture that immediately returned. "All around us," the voice murmured, "lights gone." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept along the back of Evan's neck. He checked his mirrors, looking for the glimmer of headlights behind him, but there was only the glowing rectangle of his own trailer and the diffuse halo of his taillights blurred by fog. "You part of a convoy?" he asked, the word "us" catching his attention. He tried to keep his tone even, practical. "You got more trucks with you. You boys pulled over." The answer, when it came, was swallowed halfway through by a surge of static that rose like a wave. "Been driving, not moving. Miles, same mile marker." The last three words were clear, sudden, as if they had leapt directly into the cab without bothering with airwaves. "Same mile marker." The road sign appeared out of the fog as if summoned by the phrase. A tall, narrow rectangle flashing green in his headlights, the numbers stenciled across it in white. "Mile 214. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel. The sign slipped past and vanished, devoured by the rearward fog. He licked his lips slowly, feeling the slight tremble in his fingers. He had passed mile 214 20 minutes ago. He remembered it distinctly, noted it as he checked his route in his mind. There should have been at least 3 more markers by now. The interstate was ruler straight here, an unbroken line across flat land. No curves, no exits, just markers evenly spaced, counting down the distance. He leaned forward, instinctively searching the fog for the next sign. The wipers kept time with his heartbeat. The engine thrummed beneath his feet. "Say again," he asked, the CB voice softer now. "You said you're seeing the same mile marker." Static hissed, the sound rising and falling like someone slowly turning a dial just beyond reach. 214 keeps coming back, can't get past it. The air inside the cab felt subtly heavier. The heater rattled quietly as it pushed out warm air, but a cool current drifted around his ankles, the kind that seeps into old houses late at night. Evan's mind flipped through explanations like cards. Faulty CB picking up someone stuck on a local loop. Another road, same numbering. A driver too tired, misreading signs. The brain fluttered against the unknown with small, practical tries. Yet when the second sign emerged, Standing alone in the swirling gray 10 minutes later, the neat lines of logic smudged. Mile 214. He checked the odometer. The digits marched forward unbothered. He had traveled more than 10 miles since the last sighting. The fuel gauge had dipped the tiniest fraction. The hum of the tires, the spread of the fog, the feel of the wheel under his hands, everything insisted that the truck was moving steadily onward. The world outside disagreed. On the CB, the voice broke through again, more urgent now, though still muffled by distance. Keeps repeating, can't stop, fog trucks won't turn off. Evans swallowed. What kind of trucks you running? He asked, not sure why that question of all things came to his lips. It felt like something tangible, a fact to hold on to. There was a strange pause, a gap where even the static thinned, as though the airwaves themselves were listening. Old freight haulers, the voice said slowly. Blue cabs, a silver stripe like yours. The thermos in its holder vibrated slightly as the road surface changed texture, passing briefly over a patch of noisier asphalt. A faint, metallic rattle answered under the dash. Evan's heart thudded, heavy, once, then again. He had never mentioned his truck. The thought came calmly, almost clinically, sitting itself down in his awareness without panic but with a certain coldness. The fog pressed closer to the windshield, small droplets quivering and sliding down in thin lines. He considered briefly, switching off the CB, reaching forward, flipping the knob, silencing the strange, distant conversation. Let the night be only engine noise and weak classic rock again. But his fingers stayed where they were on the wheel. Curiosity, that quiet, stubborn flame that burned in long-distance drivers, rose up. They were always watching weather and accidents, side roads and small towns, the endless theater of the highway. This was just another show, he told himself, only stranger. Where you headed? He asked, careful. You got a destination in mind. The fog swirled in the twin cones of his headlights, shapes twisting in it like slow, heavy dancers. The radio station gave up, dissolving into pure static. The only clear sound left was the CB. We're headed west, the voice said, but the road doesn't change. Every marker says 214, the clocks. The last word trailed off. Something about the way it faded sent a small shiver down his arms. What about the clocks? He pressed. Static filled the silence. For a long moment, the only rhythm was the slap of the wipers and the soft roar of rubber on wet pavement. Then, very quietly, they went back. As if in reflex, Evan's eyes flicked to the digital clock. 12:37 a.m., the same as before. He stared at it, feeling the seconds as a physical presence, waiting for the numbers to twitch forward. They did 12:38, 12:39. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In his mirrors, the fog behind seemed somewhat thinner, but it was difficult to tell. Everything was a uniform gray, depthless and matte. How long you been running the same stretch? He asked. There was a rustle over the CB, the crackle of someone shifting, maybe turning the mic in their hand. When the voice returned, it carried the weight of something that had been measured and found disturbing. The logbook says 3 hours, the voice said, but the fuel doesn't burn, the odometer doesn't move, just the road and 214. As if summoned, another sign emerged from the mist. The green rectangle loomed, reflective numbers shining briefly white. Mile 214. This time Evans said nothing. The sign passed, the trailer shuddering slightly behind him as if uneasy. The darkness seemed to deepen on either side of the highway, the fog no longer merely weather but a presence. He checked his mirrors again, slower now. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement, a suggestion of something large packing him at a distance in the murk. The impression of dim, low lights, indistinct shapes, the hint of metal glinting softly. Then the wipers swept across the glass, and whatever had been there dissolved. How many trucks in your convoy? He asked. His voice had grown softer, as if speaking too loudly might draw something closer. 7, the answer came after a heartbeat. We can see each other's lights, but we never get closer or farther. It's like we're all stuck in place, just rolling. Another pause, fainter. We can see you sometimes. The sentence drifted through the cab like a cold draft. Evan's fingers flexed on the wheel. You can see me. Your taillights, way up ahead. We try to reach you, but no matter how hard we push, the distance never changes. It's always the same, like you're painted on the horizon. He thought of the empty mirror, the dull red glow of his trailer, the unbroken silence of the interstate behind him. Yet somewhere, someone claimed to be watching his lights, reaching toward him through a fog that refused to end. How do you know it's my rig? He asked quietly. There was a long silence this time, longer than any before. The static dropped almost to nothing, so that for several seconds he heard only the small, intimate sounds of his own cab. The creak of the seat, the subtle buzz of an instrument panel, his own breath. When the voice returned, it was softer, almost gentle. Because we remember, it said, we've been here before. The air in the cab cooled a degree. Moisture condensed on the inside of the side window, blurring his reflection into vague shadows. His own eyes, gray, tired, rimmed with the faint redness of late hours, looked back at him in the glass, slightly distorted. We, he asked. Who, we? Static answered. For a moment it seemed to shape itself into words, almost forming syllables before falling apart. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic and distant, came through, like someone drumming fingers on a steering wheel. The next sign rose ahead, stark and lonely in the murk. Mile 214. His hand moved, almost against his will, reaching toward the CB knob. He turned it down a fraction, then up again, as if testing whether the voice would remain. Where did you start from? He tried. What's the last place you remember before this? The response, when it came, was quieter yet, the words drawn as if from far away. Rest stop with the old vending machines eastbound. You stopped there too, years ago. Blue truck, silver stripe, same scars on the bumper. Evan's chest tightened, a deep muscle pulling taut. Memory answered before skepticism could. He saw in his mind's eye a small, weary rest area in the middle of nowhere. A long T-shaped parking lot, a low brick building that smelled of coffee and rain. 2 vending machines humming in the corner by the bathrooms, one of them with a flickering light behind faded buttons. A lonely map under plexiglass with a few routes traced by finger grease. He had stopped at a place like that years back on a stormy night. The air had smelled of wet asphalt and stale chips. He had stood under the weak sodium lamps, listening to the distant hiss of the highway. The memory was ordinary, anchored in 1,000 other nights on the road. But there was one small detail that snagged. The vending machine with the stuck button labeled ginger ale, a faint, out-of-order sign curling at the edges. He had tried it anyway, just to see. The machine had whirred and clunked, then delivered a warm bottle of water instead. No one else had been there that night, or so he had thought. Another sign approached, the green rectangle emerging from the mist like the answer to a question he hadn't meant to ask. Mile 214. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing closer to the truck as if listening. The world outside the narrow span of his headlights had retreated entirely. It felt as though the highway floated in an endless, featureless void. You're close, the voice murmured, words nearly lost in static. We can tell. The lights you're starting to blur. Evan found his eyes drifting to the edges of the beams, to where the light dissolved into gray. For an instant, it seemed as though the fog was not just moisture but a curtain with depth. Shapes hinted at behind it, not trees or fence posts, but tall, rectangular silhouettes lined up in a row as if waiting. He blinked, the shapes vanished, the road continued unwavering. What happens when I reach you? He asked. He wasn't sure why he asked it. maybe because some part of him had already accepted that what was happening had slid away from the ordinary into something else. The answer did not come at once. Static filled the cab like a light rain. The engine note deepened slightly as the road rose in a barely perceptible incline. His headlights struck a new surface ahead, the pale, roughened seams of an overpass looming suddenly from the fog. He hadn't seen an overpass on the map for this stretch. The last one should have been miles back. Yet here it was, a low bridge of concrete spanning the highway, its support columns ghostly in the night. No signage, no exit, just a bridge standing alone in the emptiness. As he passed under it, the voice on the CB spoke again, so softly it was almost a thought. No one remembers the first time they drove this stretch, it said. Only the loops after, the way the markers don't change, the way the fog feels familiar, like home. The air under the overpass turned briefly colder, a pocket of chill that breathed down through the thin metal roof of the cab. The sound of his engine echoed strangely in the confined space, then broke apart as he emerged back into open air. He checked the clock. 12:37 a.m. The digits burned back at him calmly, untroubled. His fingers moved, slow and deliberate, to the CB. He switched the channel up one, then down, then back to 19. Each click felt decisive, small, like stepping off and back onto the same path. The static ebbed and flowed, but the voice did not return. The radio dial for music now only offered a low, continuous hiss, as if the world had turned its stations away. For several miles, if they were miles, he drove in heavy silence. The fog shifted subtly, thin tendrils trailing closer to the glass, then drifting back. The hum of the engine became almost hypnotic, a continuous, soothing drone. His own fatigue resurfaced, wrapping itself around his thoughts like cotton. Another sign appeared out of the gray. Mile 215. Relief washed over him, sharp enough to be almost startling. The numbers, so small and simple, felt like a promise kept. The clock moved, 12:41. He watched both measures of time and distance with something like gratitude. The fog began to lift slowly, as if reluctant to let him go. The edges of the world returned first. The dim outline of fence rows, the suggestion of distant barns, the low black line of trees at the horizon. The sky, still cloudy, lightened by a shade, hinting at the coming of dawn somewhere far to the east. Behind him, in the mirrors, the murk thickened once more into a seamless wall. He could have switched off the CB then, could have chalked up the entire exchange to a tired mind, a defective radio, a trick of atmospheric conditions. He could have chosen the more comforting path of disbelief. Instead, he reached for the mic one last time. "Convoy running 214, he said quietly. "If you're still out there, I passed it. I'm clear. Keep your eyes on the signs." He waited a few seconds. There was only static, a low, patient sea of sound. Then faintly, so faintly he almost doubted he had heard it at all, a reply slipped through. "We know," it said. "We're watching your lights. Maybe next time you'll remember us sooner." The wipers swept once, twice. The road ahead opened wider, the fog retreating to low-hanging patches. A distant shape resolved into the warm, familiar glow of a truck stop, its lights like a small constellation against the muted sky. Evan drove on, the numbers on his dash ticking steadily forward. He would pull in for fuel, for coffee that was too hot and pie that tasted mostly of nostalgia. He would talk to another driver or two about the weather, the road conditions, the endless march of freight. And somewhere, back in the lingering fog near mile 214, a line of 7 trucks might still be rolling in place, their drivers watching a distant pair of red taillights that grew no closer and no farther, waiting for some unseen loop to close. On the interstate, miles away, his trailer lights glowed steadily in the night, cutting a thin thread of color through the gray. The fog sighed and rearranged itself around the absence he left behind. Story number 2. Fog rolled in off the low hills like a slow-moving tide, covering the interstate in a soft, smothering gray. It was the kind of fog that didn't just hover near the ground but climbed, rising in dense layers until it swallowed the sky and erased the stars. The night that had been crisp and clear an hour ago was now a muffled, cotton-wrapped world. Everything outside the glass narrowed to the width of 2 headlight beams. Nora Hale leaned forward slightly in her seat, fingers loose but ready on the wheel. The cab lights were turned down as low as they'd go, so the glow from the dash barely outlined her hands and the worn texture of the steering wheel. Her rig, a white Kenworth sleeper with a faded company logo, moved steadily through the murk, trailer sighing softly behind like a sleeping beast. The GPS screen mounted above the radio painted a calm, digital version of the road ahead. A straight line, a few upcoming exits, a blue arrow sliding along like a piece on a quiet board game. Out the windshield, the highway was an entirely different story. The fog seemed to absorb light, turning her high beams into a pale wall. She switched down to low again and cut her speed, watching the faint ghost of the centerline drift in and out of view. The air inside the cab smelled faintly of black coffee, vinyl, and the lemon-scented wipe she'd run over the dash at her last stop. Outside was damp earth and cold asphalt, a clean, mineral smell that she could only catch in quick ghosts when she cracked the side window for a bit of fresh air. The heater hummed low, blowing lukewarm air around her boots. It was her first solo cross-country run. She had done regional routes days at a time, but this was different. New territory, longer hours, no familiar landmarks. The company dispatcher had wished her luck with a grin she could hear over the phone, and her trainer had slapped the side of her truck before she rolled out, saying, "You'll be fine, Hale. Just respect the road and it'll usually respect you back." Usually. The CB was on, volume low, background static like the ocean heard through a wall. Earlier there had been idle chatter, someone complaining about a bad batch of coffee at a truck stop 2 hours behind her, another voice sharing rumors about a new way station. But now the channel had gone quiet. Most drivers had either pulled off or were navigating their own patches of fog, eyes and minds too busy for talk. Nora sipped from her travel mug. The coffee had cooled to that tepid middle ground that wasn't pleasant but wasn't quite bad enough to throw away. Ahead, a muted glow bled into the fog, a highway sign somewhere up in the murk. She eased off the accelerator a touch more and squinted. The letters emerged slowly. Heavy fog area, next 30 miles. Use caution, next rest area 18 miles. The reflective green slid past, its warning swallowed almost immediately by the gray. 18 miles of this would be a long time. She flexed her shoulders carefully, listening to the small pops in her spine, then settled back in. The radio, tuned to a late-night station, began to dissolve into static. The song that had been playing, a slow, twangy ballad, warped and stretched, then retreated under a wash of noise. Nora frowned, reached out, and turned the knob slightly. The static shifted to a higher hiss, then deepened, but no music returned. "Guess you're done for the night," she murmured under her breath, tapping the knob off. The cab fell into a thick silence broken only by the rolling whisper of rubber on wet pavement and the low, steady rumble of the engine. Fog moved in silent drifts past her windows, tendrils sliding over the side mirrors like ghostly hands. The rest of the world had vanished. There were no distant farm lights, no oncoming headlights, not even the faint suggestion of tree lines. It felt as if the truck floated in a private pocket of space, tethered only by the lines painted beneath her tires. Time stretched, miles trickled by. The sensation of motion started to feel abstract, like a story told rather than something experienced. Without scenery or landmarks, the brain lost its usual hooks. It was just the road, the dark, and the white lines slipping away. Her GPS pinged softly. A new icon had appeared on the screen, a small symbol just ahead on the highway, an exit that hadn't been there earlier. The label beneath it read, GRAYBRIDGE Service Plaza. Nora frowned. Her route notes, printed and folded in the compartment above, didn't mention a gray bridge. She hadn't seen it on the digital map when she'd checked earlier either. The last rest area before the state line had been marked at roughly 40 miles ahead, no mention of anything in between. She glanced back at the fog-shrouded world beyond the glass, then returned her eyes to the pale, unwavering certainty of the GPS display. The new exit blinked softly, as if encouraging. The CB crackled. At first it was just static, a subtle rise and fall. Then a voice, faint and a little distorted, emerged from the noise. Advisory, all units, heavy fog conditions between mile 143 and 176. Recommend reduced speeds. Optional rest available at Graybridge Service Plaza, exit 154. Visibility near zero in places. Exercise caution. The transmission fuzzed at the edges, breaking apart, then smoothed again in time for the tail end of the announcement. Repeat, Graybridge Service Plaza, exit 154, for drivers needing to wait out conditions. Dispatch out. Nora rested her fingertips lightly on the CB mic but didn't pick it up. She had heard highway advisories before, state troopers warning of deer, debris, avalanches, black ice, but something about this one felt strangely old-fashioned. The cadence of the voice, maybe. The faint hiss underneath, like tape. Her eyes dropped to the GPS again. It now clearly showed exit 154 marked with a small fuel pump, a bed symbol, and what might have been a fork and knife. Full services. The blue arrow of her truck crawled closer. A dim sign materialized ahead in the fog, its green face damp and glistening with condensed moisture. Exit 154, GRAYBRIDGE Service Plaza, 1 mile. The letters were slightly uneven, as if the sign had been replaced or hand-fixed at some point. She blinked, surprised to see any sign at all in this weather, then checked her fuel gauge. Almost half a tank. She didn't need to stop. By the logbook, she didn't need a break yet either. But the fog showed no sign of thinning. If anything, it seemed denser off to the right, where the land sloped downward. The idea of pulling off somewhere well-lit, with coffee and maybe other drivers to talk to, tugged at her thoughts. Her first solo run didn't have to include stubbornly pushing through 30 miles of zero visibility just to prove something to herself. Her thumb tapped the steering wheel lightly, a small, unconscious beat of indecision. The GPS zoomed, the exit icon growing larger as the sensor judged her approach. "All right," she murmured finally, mostly to the muted cab. "1 cup of coffee, just to wait it out." The next sign came quickly. Exit 154, GRAYBRIDGE Service Plaza, 1/4 mile. An arrow pointed right into a wall of mist. The off-ramp appeared with no warning, the pale triangle of the gore sign barely visible until she was almost upon it. Nora signaled, eased the truck over into the exit lane, and felt the slight change under her tires as the pavement angled away from the interstate. At once, the character of the fog seemed to change. On the main highway, it had been a broad, even field, like being inside a cloud. Here, on the narrowing ramp, it became thicker in some places and thinner in others. It coiled in slow, deliberate shapes, leaving small windows of slightly clearer air and then closing them again. The sound of her engine, bouncing off unseen walls or trees, took on a hollow echo. She dropped her speed further, the truck crawling along the curve of the off-ramp. Dim, amber lights emerged in the distance, blurred halos in the gray. One by one, more lights joined them, tall poles, the squared shapes of building signs, the low, warm glow of canopy lights over what might have been fuel pumps. Emerging fully from the ramp, she found herself facing a sprawling service plaza laid out in a wide, looping curve. It resembled the older rest stops she'd seen in photos, a central low building with a gently sloped roof, flanked by rows of parking on either side. To the far left, the tall profiles of trucks rose from the fog like sleeping beasts lined in formation. To the right, a handful of smaller car-sized shapes glowed softly with reflected yellow light. The sign over the entrance drive was backlit but slightly faded, the letters plain. GREYBRIDGE Service Plaza. No franchise logos crowded it. No bright brand names shouted from the storefronts. Just that simple name and beneath it in smaller font, Fuel, Food, Showers, Lounge. Nora eased the Kenworth into the truck lot. The pavement here was damp but smooth, painted lines visible under the misty sheen. The fog seemed to thin slightly in the immediate area, as if repelled by the glow of the tall sodium vapor lights. Beyond those pools of illumination, though, the gray pressed close, forming a soft wall. She found a spot along the outer row and straightened the trailer neatly between two faded lines. To her left, a long-nosed Peterbilt rested with its engine off, chrome dulled by condensation. To her right, a boxy, older Freightliner, its faded company logo almost unreadable, sat very still, no light visible inside the cab. Shifting into neutral and setting the brake, Nora listened. It was quiet, not the emptiness of an abandoned lot, but a padded sort of quiet, as if sounds were simply taking their time. There was the faint hiss of air systems, the distant hum of what might have been refrigeration units, and beneath it all, the subtle white noise of fog brushing softly against metal. One by one, she flicked off switches. Headlights first to parking lamps, then dark. Marker lights stayed on, a dim outline of amber and red marking the truck's presence. She slipped on her jacket, its fabric slightly stiff from past rains, and pulled her cap low over her forehead. When she opened the door, the cold air came in like a gentle wave, cool and slightly damp, carrying the smells of diesel, wet pavement, and faintly coffee. The fog swirled slowly around her boots as she climbed down, the steps slick under her soles. It felt thicker on the lot than it had inside the truck, a tangible thing that pressed lightly against her skin as she walked. Light spilled from the entrance of the main building, a soft, yellowish glow that seemed warmer than the harsh bluish beams she was used to at newer chain stops. The windows on either side of the door were fogged in places but bright inside, silhouettes moving now and then across the glass. A bell above the door gave a gentle, mechanical ring when she pushed it open. Warmth wrapped around her immediately, bringing with it the mingled scents of brewed coffee, something frying on a griddle, dish soap, and old linoleum. The floor underfoot had that slight give of well-worn vinyl tiles, and the overhead lights hummed with the particular buzz of older fluorescent fixtures. The lobby area was wider than she'd expected. Straight ahead, a long lunch counter curved gently, a line of round stools bolted to the floor. Red vinyl booths stretched along the windows, some occupied by figures in caps and jackets, cups steaming in front of them. To the right, a small convenience shop area held shelves of snacks, a rotating rack of faded postcards, and a refrigerated section humming softly. To the left, signs pointed toward showers, restrooms, and a lounge. Everything felt just a half step backward in time. The coffee pots behind the counter were the glass kind, resting on square black warmers. The menu above was a backlit board with individual plastic letters slid into place, announcing MEATLOAF, PANCAKES, and something called GREYBRIDGE Special. The faces of the people scattered through the dining area were unremarkable at first glance, tired, relaxed, absorbed in their own thoughts, but their clothes and gear seemed slightly mismatched in era. One man's jacket bore a logo for a company that had changed its name years ago. Another driver's cap was for a brand long since discontinued. The waitress noticed her almost immediately. She was in her 50s maybe, with her gray hair pulled back into a bun and a pencil tucked behind one ear. Her name tag simply read MARA. "Even in there, sweetheart," she said, not unkindly. "Fog's getting bad out there, huh? Grab a seat wherever you like." Nora managed a small nod and slid into a booth. By the window, outside, the lot was a hazy pattern of light and shadow, trucks reduced to vague, dark shapes. The fog pressed against the glass, beating into tiny droplets that slowly merged and crawled downward. Mara appeared at her elbow with a coffee pot before Nora had even taken off her jacket. "First time through Graybridge?" she asked, tilting the pot toward the empty cup on the table as if the answer were already yes. "I think so," Nora said. "I don't remember seeing it on the map." Mara chuckled softly. The coffee, when it poured, smelled rich and oddly familiar, like the kind her grandfather used to drink. "Maps miss a lot these days," she said. "But we're here when folks need us. You out long haul?" "Yeah, first solo run." The admission came more easily than she'd expected. The warmth of the place loosened something in her chest. Mara nodded in a way that suggested she'd known it the moment Nora walked in. "You sit a spell. Fog'll lift when it's ready. It usually does." "Usually." Nora wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the heat soak into her fingers. Around her, the low murmur of conversation continued, punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery or the hiss of the griddle. The jukebox in the corner, an actual jukebox with a glass front and visible rows of song titles, was playing something soft from decades back, the melody weaving gently through the air. She watched the other patrons out of the corner of her eye. A man with a beard like steel wool sat at the counter, his elbows planted firmly, staring into his mug as if reading some pattern in the swirling surface. A woman with her hair in a braid, wearing a flannel shirt and worn jeans, scribbled in a small notebook between bites of toast. In the corner booth, an older couple shared a plate, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same item. Nothing was overtly strange, and yet each time Nora's gaze rested on something, a small ripple of oddity surfaced. The postcards by the shop included images of gas prices that hadn't been that low in her adult life. The wall clock above the register had hands, not digits, and ticked audibly. The payphone on the far wall, an actual payphone, stood upright and clean, as if waiting patiently for someone to use it. Her phone, when she checked it, showed no service, not even a lonely bar. Wi-Fi networks were few and oddly named. GRAYBRIDGE lounge and staff only. No open signals. The time on the screen seemed normal, though, 12:19 a.m. Mara brought her a slice of pie without being asked, setting it down with a practiced, gentle thunk. "On the house," she said. "Keeps the fog from sticking to your bones." Nora smiled despite herself, the corners of her mouth relaxing. "Is that scientifically proven?" "Best kind of proof," Mara said, topping off her coffee. "Anecdotal from people who keep coming back." The pie was apple, the crust slightly soft on the bottom from the steam but crisp along the edges. The sugar on top had melted into tiny glassy patches. It tasted like something from a small-town church bake sale, honest and unpretentious, sweet in a way that had nothing to do with corn syrup. As she ate, the booth across from hers filled. 3 drivers slid in together, their jackets damp along the shoulders. They talked in low voices, the kind of quiet exchange that came from long hours on the road. Snippets drifted over, about miles, dispatchers, construction zones, but certain words snagged her attention. "Took Graybridge again," one said, his voice like gravel smoothed by years of coffee. "Fog this thick, I'm not messin' with that stretch past the river." "Better'n the alternative," another replied. "Remember those pileups back in '98? Whole line of trucks just disappeared into each other." "Always here when it's bad," the third murmured. "Funny thing, though, can't find it on any of the new charts." Nora looked back down at her plate, the fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her ears burned slightly with the awareness that she was listening in. The jukebox switched tracks with a soft click, a new, older song beginning as if on cue. She stayed another hour. It didn't feel like an hour. Time there had a different texture, smoothing itself out so that minutes blended into one another. She refilled her coffee, took a slow turn through the shop to stretch her legs, read a few of the postcards for sale and smiled at their earnest, outdated slogans. She glanced at the newspapers stacked in a rack, their dates obscured by the way they were folded. When she stepped into the restroom, the air was cooler but still gently heated, smelling of soap and something floral. The mirror over the sinks reflected her face, slightly more tired than when she'd started her shift, but not as drawn as she'd expected. The stall doors were painted a muted blue, chipped at the edges in a way that suggested years rather than neglect. By the time she shrugged her jacket back on and headed for the door, the bell above it chimed softly again, as if marking not just her exit but a small change in the air. Outside, the fog still lay thick over the lot. The sodium vapor lamps carved out islands of yellow light where moisture danced lazily. Beyond those islands, the gray was absolute. The trucks sat in orderly rows, their silhouettes faded and softened. A few idled with low, steady growls. Most were silent, small rectangles of light here and there indicating life within. Nora walked back to her Kenworth, boots thudding softly on the damp pavement. Each breath she took seemed to carry tiny droplets with it, cool against her throat. Her own truck looked reassuringly familiar, streaks of road dust and bug specks still visible along the chrome. Climbing back into the cab, she settled into the seat and closed the door, shutting out the muffled quiet of the lot. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. Her travel mug waited in the holder. A pen lay where it had rolled against the edge of a notepad. Her logbook sat open on the passenger side with her last entry neat and square. She reached for the ignition, paused. Something nudged at the back of her awareness. An almost forgotten appointment, a detail out of place. Her eyes slid to the digital clock on the dash. 12:19 a.m. She stared at it, then tapped the glass lightly with one fingertip. The numbers held. Her phone, when she pulled it from her pocket, confirmed the same time. 12:19. The minutes had not moved since she'd checked them at the booth, or if they had, they'd circled back of their own accord. A soft crackle from the CB drew her attention away. She reached over and adjusted the volume slightly. Advisory update. The voice this time was clearer, more contemporary, the crisp tones of a dispatch center. Fog density increasing along interstate corridor between mile 143 and 176. Multiple minor incidents reported. Recommend all non-essential traffic seek shelter. Graybridge Service Plaza available at exit 154 for those requiring extended wait. She listened, eyes drifting to the side window. The fog clung there in delicate patterns, droplets clinging like constellations. Note, Graybridge exit 154 not reflected on some digital mapping systems. Follow roadside signage. Dispatch out. The transmission ended in a neat little burst of static. Nora sat very still. Not reflected on some systems. She glanced at her GPS. The screen showed her truck icon resting neatly in a parking area adjacent to the highway labeled Service. No name. Zooming out, she saw the highway itself, the stretch ahead and behind, but no Graybridge text. And yet, when she zoomed in again, the exit number appeared, 154. The small symbol remained, but its label had vanished. She exhaled slowly. A strange calm settled over her, as if some part of her had crossed a mental threshold without realizing it, accepting that the night, the fog, and this place were operating according to their own quiet rules. Hand steady, she turned the key. The engine coughed once, then came to life with a satisfying rumble. Gauges rose to their usual marks. The soft tremor of the idling diesel vibrated through the floor and seat, a familiar comfort. Outside, the lot seemed exactly the same. And yet, as her headlights flared to life and cast their beams across the fog, the edges of trucks she'd barely noticed before took on a strange clarity. On one side, an old cabover with a faded logo from a company that had gone under years ago. On the other, a gleaming rig whose plates bore a registration design she didn't recognize, as if from a future issue of the DMV. All of them here, resting in the same damp, glowing half-world. She eased out of the slot, the truck rolling smoothly forward. The Service Plaza building passed slowly by on her left, windows warm, a few figures visible inside. Mara wiping down a counter, someone at the jukebox, a silhouette carrying a stack of plates. The bell over the door rang faintly as someone else stepped in out of the fog. At the lot's exit, the pavement curved back toward an access road. A small sign stood there, tilted slightly, its reflective surface worn. Thank you for visiting GRAYBRI. Drive safe, see you next time. The fog thickened almost immediately as she left the pool of lights. The truck's beams caught swirls and eddies of white, and the access road rose gently to meet the freeway. For a moment, the world shrank to the hood of her Kenworth, the ghost of the guardrail, and the vague glow of the ramp's reflective markers. Then she was merging back onto the interstate, turn signal clicking softly in the cab. The main highway had changed. Not in any dramatic, obvious way. The same number of lanes, the same gentle curves, but the fog here was heavier, a thicker blanket pressed low. Now and then, the faint flash of hazard lights appeared far ahead, then vanished. Once, she passed a cluster of cones and the shadowed shells of sedans sitting crooked in the median, a tow truck's rotating beacons smearing weak color in the mist. Her speed stayed lower than usual, 30, 35. The engine was almost a purr. The white lines slid away beneath her, an unbroken story. She glanced at the mile marker as it emerged momentarily from the fog. Mile 143. The number matched the advisory's warning range. She imagined those miles unwinding ahead like thread. Somewhere out there, other drivers would be pulled over, hazards blinking, waiting for conditions to improve. Some might be wishing for a place to stop, a warm light, coffee, a slice of pie. She looked in her mirror. Far behind her, through the dense gray, a faint, warm glow lingered low on the horizon for a heartbeat, the suggestion of a cluster of lights where the exit should be. Then the fog shifted, swallowing it. Her phone buzzed softly on the dash. A text from dispatch blinked onto the screen, hearing about heavy fog on your route. Take it slow. Pull off if you need to. Checking weather now. Nora smiled, a small private thing, and tapped back with one hand, pulled off for a bit. Found a place. Back on the road now. All good. She did not mention Graybridge by name. It didn't seem necessary. Or maybe some instinct suggested that nomming it might make it feel less real. The CB remained quiet for several miles, then came to life with the ordinary music of the road again. A warning about a state trooper running radar, a joke about terrible vending machine sandwiches, someone humming along too loudly to an unheard song. She drove through the remaining fog, watched it thin by degrees until it became only a patchy mist in the low places. The night on the far side of the fog bank was still and clear, stars reappearing above like cautious witnesses. Her clock, finally, ticked to 12:20, then 12:21. By the time dawn smeared a faint, silvery line along the eastern edge of the sky, the experience had already begun to feel like something that had happened in the soft borderland between waking and sleep. Concrete, but edged in dream. Later, at another stop 2 states away, she sat across from an older driver in a fluorescent-lit chain diner. He listened quietly while she described the fog, the advisory, and the plaza with the bell over the door and the jukebox in the corner. When she said the name Graybridge, he paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. A slow recognition moved across his features, not of the story but of the pattern. Yeah, he said slowly, setting the fork down. I think I know it. Didn't the sign say something like drive safe, see you next time on the way out? Her heart gave that small, odd leap of surprise. You've been there. Once or twice, he said, maybe more, hard to remember exactly. He took a sip of coffee, eyes drifting to the window where the daylight lay yellow across the parking lot. Funny thing about Graybridge, nobody seems to find it when they go looking for it, only when they need it. He didn't elaborate, He didn't have to. The road had its own ways of taking care of, and sometimes quietly unsettling the ones who traveled it. That night, hours down another stretch of another highway, when the world had narrowed again to 2 lanes and a set of glowing lines, Nora caught a faint, familiar scent in the cab. Old coffee, warm apple pie, linoleum. It faded almost at once, leaving only diesel and her own travel mug. She drove on, and somewhere behind her, where the fog pooled low over a certain bend in the interstate, an unremarkable green sign might or might not have reflected back the words. Exit 154, GRAYBRIDGE Service Plaza. Story number 3. The desert at night could be as empty as the far side of the moon. Miles of scrub and rock stretched out on either side of the interstate, but beneath the weight of darkness and fog, all of it vanished. The land flattened into an idea instead of a thing, replaced by a narrow band of asphalt and the pale wash of headlights. Marcus Klein had been rolling through that emptiness for hours. His rig, a deep red Freightliner Cascadia pulling a polished aluminum tanker, moved with the unhurried assurance of something that knew its job. The hum of the engine was a low, constant presence, a sound Marcus had come to rely on over 20 years of long haul. It vibrated gently up through the floor, through the pedals, into his boots and bones. Outside the windshield, a thin ground fog had appeared an hour ago, creeping up from the low washes and dry creek beds, the kind of valley mist he'd seen 1,000 times. But it hadn't burned off the way desert fog usually did. Instead, it had grown thicker, gathering itself into slow-rolling banks that draped over the roadway and swallowed the stars. The world had reduced itself to a simple scene, 2 silver ribbons of lane lines sliding beneath him, the faint texture of old tar snakes etched darker into the pavement, and the diffuse gray that hung over everything like gauze. Even the moon had given up, its light only an impression behind the clouds. The cab felt like its own small ship, gliding through an unmarked sea. Marcus sat comfortably in his seat, back settled against the worn padding, one hand on the wheel at 5 o'clock. The dash lights painted his face in a soft blue-green glow, highlighting the lines at the corners of his eyes and mouth. The coffee in his stainless steel mug had gone lukewarm, but he sipped at it anyway, more for the ritual than the taste. He preferred the night. Fewer cars, fewer distractions, just the road, the hum, and the privacy of his own thoughts. Out here, he could let his mind wander without needing to impress anyone with conversation. But even he had to admit, this fog was unusual. It didn't behave like weather. It moved with a peculiar deliberation, as if it were choosing where to thicken and where to thin. Sometimes it parted just enough to suggest the ghostly outline of distant hills. Sometimes it surged up in a sudden, impenetrable wave that forced him to ease off the throttle and focus intently on the faint glimmer of the center line. He checked the GPS. The small screen showed a long, straight stretch of highway with nothing of note for dozens of miles. No towns, no rest areas, not even a marked scenic overlook. Just a pale yellow line marching east-west through a beige expanse of nothing. The digital clock on the dash read 1:14 a.m. On the CB, Channel 19 murmured softly with background static. Now and then a distant voice would fight through, thin and muffled by distance, but no conversations held. Marcus had the volume turned low, more for company than information. It was comforting somehow to know that somewhere in the dark, other drivers were also awake and moving. He was thinking about a song from years ago. He couldn't place the artist, just a line about highways made of ghosts, when he saw the taillights. 2 small red dots appeared far ahead in the fog, perfectly centered in his lane. At first they were faint, barely more than a suggestion of color in the gray. Then they sharpened, flaring just a little brighter as his lights caught them. Marcus blinked once, rolled his shoulders, and instinctively eased off the accelerator a touch more. He hadn't seen another vehicle in at least 30 miles. It wasn't impossible, of course. Someone could have merged from a hidden on-ramp, or he simply might have misjudged the distance since the fog had closed in. But the sudden presence felt odd, like a sentence begun without a beginning. He watched the lights carefully. They held steady, bobbing a fraction with the motion of the road, but the distance between them and his bumper didn't seem to change. He nudged the cruise off and let his speed drift down. For a few seconds, the gap appeared to close, the red dots growing marginally larger. Then, almost imperceptibly, they seemed to drift away again, regaining their original size. The effect was subtle enough that he might have chalked it up to tired eyes. Still, a small thread of curiosity tightened in his chest. On a long, empty run, curiosity could be both a blessing and a curse. It kept the mind alert, but also gave it plenty of room to imagine. He checked his rearview mirrors. Fog, the round, blurred glow of his own trailer's marker lights. No sign of headlights behind him. Then, as if the night had been waiting for him to look, a faint white gleam materialized in the distance to the rear, 2 pinpricks low to the ground, exactly in line with the center of his lane. Marcus flexed his hand slowly around the wheel. Now he was the middle bead on an invisible string, red lights ahead, white lights behind, all 3 traveling in precise alignment. For a moment, it amused him. Some unofficial convoy had formed in the night, unknown drivers falling into an accidental formation in the fog. Still, something about the perfect symmetry of it tugged at him. He flipped the CB volume up a notch. "Anyone else out here on 32 eastbound in this mess?" he asked, voice calm, thumb pressing the transmit button. "Got a couple lights that seem mighty familiar." The reply didn't come immediately. The static hissed and rolled. Then, after several seconds, a voice emerged. "Copy eastbound. Been watching your taillights for a while now." It was a man's voice, low and worn, with that particular cadence of someone who'd logged years behind the wheel. There was nothing remarkable about it except for one thing. The tone, the rhythm, the slight gravel at the edges. It felt, in a strange, almost visceral way, like listening to himself on a recording. Marcus frowned slightly. "That's so," he said. "Thought I was out here by my lonesome, you right behind me." A soft chuckle filtered through the speaker. "Sure am. Close enough to see the scuff on your left mud flap. Red Freightliner tanker, company logo half peeled off on the back door." Marcus's heart gave one hard, unmistakable thump in his chest. He glanced in his side mirror, as if he might catch a glimpse of his own trailer, which was of course impossible. All he saw was his usual view, the curve of the tanker, the faint sheen where metal caught his headlights, the small, familiar scratches and dings. Details only someone right next to him, or inside the same cab, would know. He cleared his throat lightly. "Sounds like you got good eyesight in this fog," he said. The attempt at casualness came out slightly stiff. "Been looking at it a long time," the voice answered in an easy drawl. In the background, Marcus thought he heard the dull rattle of something on a dashboard, the faint rush of a similar engine. "Besides, it's my truck. Hard to mistake it." The words settled in the air like a small stone dropped into still water. No big splash, just ripples moving out, intersecting with the quiet. Marcus's hands tightened invisibly on the wheel, the leather soft and smooth under his palms. He took a breath, slow, through his nose. The cab smelled of old coffee, laundry detergent from his bunk curtains, and the faint lingering trace of the cologne he'd sprayed that morning more out of habit than necessity. "Come again," he said, polite. "You sayin' you're runnin' a red Freightliner tanker too?" "Sure am," the voice replied. "Red Cascadia, same dent on the driver's side fender, same little turtle sticker on the dash, same cracked air freshener hangin' from the vent." Involuntarily, Marcus's gaze dropped to the vent. A faded cardboard tree air freshener swung gently there, its scent long gone, kept more out of superstition than function. On the dash, a small green turtle figurine watched the road with unblinking eyes. The CB hissed softly, the noise around the voice like the sound of surf retreating along a beach. "Always liked that little turtle," the man said. "Picked it up at that truck stop outside Amarillo. Remember, the one with the blue picnic tables. You were wondering if you should splurge the extra $1. "All right now," Marcus murmured, more to the truck than to the radio. His spine prickled, a slow, even spread of sensation. "You're macking some big assumptions there, friend." "Just good memory," the man said gently. "We've got plenty of time to hold onto the details out here." The taillights ahead bobbed once as the unknown truck hit a minor imperfection in the road, then steadied again. The headlights behind did the same, perfectly matched but inverted, like a reflection. Marcus had passed through Amarillo 2 days earlier. He had, in fact, bought the turtle then, turning it over in his big hand while the cashier made small talk about the heat. He reached for the CB mic again, hesitated. The fog felt thicker than ever, dampening the beams from his headlights so thoroughly that the world seemed to end 20 feet in front of his bumper. The sense of being outside of ordinary space deepened. The desert might still stretch out endlessly on either side, or there might be nothing at all beyond that gray curtain. He clicked the mic. "What do you call yourself?" he asked. "Handle, I mean." The answer came without a beat of hesitation. "Most folks just call me Marcus," the voice said, mild. "Been a while since anyone asked for a handle proper." He stopped breathing for half a second. The truck didn't seem to notice. It just hummed on, eaters of miles and hours and doubt. Third-person omniscient though the telling was, his inner thoughts rose clean and clear. There were coincidence explanations. There were prank possibilities. Someone who'd overheard him introduce himself at a fuel stop, maybe. A driver who recognized his company logo and had a good memory for faces. But none of that accounted for the small, private facts being laid out as easily as route notes. Ahead, the red taillights glowed steadily, unwavering anchors in the fog. Behind, the white headlights kept perfect pace. "All right, Marcus," he said slowly. "Let's say I humor you. Where exactly you runnin' tonight?" "Same place you are," the other replied. "Eastbound on 32, somewhere between nowhere and nowhere else. Thick fog, desert on both sides, no towns for miles. Sound about right?" "It does," Marcus admitted. "You solo?" "For the moment," the voice said, "but looks like I'm in a convoy now." He couldn't tell if the man was smiling. The tone suggested an easy, ordinary night, like two strangers chatting on any dark stretch. The weight behind it was anything but ordinary. Another sound entered the CB's background then, the barest suggestion of a second voice, too faint and overlapped by static to be understood. It sounded familiar as well. Dry, slightly higher, a timbre Marcus associated with himself years ago, before time had deepened it. The faint voice spoke, then fell away. The primary one answered someone on his end that Marcus could not hear. "Got company?" Marcus asked. "Just another one of us," the man replied. "Runs ahead of you. You can see his lights if you look sharp." Marcus thought of the red dots in the fog. "You're saying there's a third red Freightliner out here," he said. "All of us stacked in a line on the same road." "That's one way to put it," the voice said. "Feels more like a hall of mirrors to me. You ever been in one of those, at a fair?" He had when he was a boy, once. His father's work boots had echoed on the plywood floor. The smell of popcorn and oil had filled the air. Mirrors on all sides throwing back distortion after distortion of his own reflection as he tried to find the way out. Every direction had been himself, stretched and shrunk and multiplied. The fog around the truck thickened briefly, sucking in even his own lights to a dull smear of brightness. Then it parted again into a slightly less dense corridor. An idea slid into place in Marcus's mind, quiet and uninvited. Whatever this was, it did not feel entirely malicious. Unsettling, yes, unfamiliar. It pressed on old instincts that whispered about turning around, finding clear skis. But the voice on the radio did not carry the hollow thrill of a prankster. It sounded tired, patient, as though it had been waiting a long time for someone to ask the right question. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking softly. "What do you mean, one of us?" he asked. On the CB, the faint secondary voice murmured again, a broken scrap of sound slipping through the static band. It said something about mile marker, and again. The main voice responded, but the reply was lost. "You ever get the feelin' you've done something before?" the man answered after a beat. "Same stretch, same song, same thought crossin' your mind at the same moment it did 10 years ago." He let the question hang for a breath. "Some runs feel like that, this one especially." Marcus glanced at the clock. 1:21 a.m. It had been 1:14 not long ago. The minutes marched on, orderly, not looping like in some campfire tale. His fuel gauge dropped slowly as expected. His odometer ticked up, mile by accurate mile. "What's special about this run?" he asked. The man took a breath. Marcus could hear it clearly, a soft inhale as if the mic were held too close to his mouth. "Feels like a place where the road folds," he said. "Not in the dramatic way folks like to talk about, just gentle, like paper creased back on itself. Sometimes, if someone been on this stretch often enough, their runs stop talking turns and start running alongside." The taillights ahead wavered mildly as the unknown driver adjusted, then settled back into their precise center position. "You're saying you're me from some other time?" Marcus asked. He surprised himself with how level his voice sounded. "I'm saying I remember you passing through," the man replied. "More than once, I remember wondering if you'd ever notice." The soft secondary voice spoke up again, clearer this time, riding on a brief dip in the static. "He doesn't see us yet," it said. It sounded younger, more impatient. "He never does this early." Marcus's throat tightened. "Who's that?" he asked. "Us from way back," the main voice replied, as if remarking on the weather. "Always a little ahead, always a little restless. You remember talking this route on your first big west to east, before you knew the company runs by heart." He did. He remembered his palms slick on the wheel, nerves prickling at the thought of grades and whether he hadn't yet experienced alone. He had driven a night not unlike this, fog clinging in the hollows, CB chatter thin and far between. He remembered feeling watched somehow, in a way he had attributed to nerves. It occurred to him then that in his mirrors that night, there had been a faint red glow he hadn't been able to place. He had told himself it was a distant tower light. The fog around his truck thinned slightly, enough to hint at something beyond the immediate boundary of his headlights. Dark shapes loomed and rolled by on either side, neither rock nor bush. They suggested bulk, long forms aligned with the road, ghostly and parallel. He blinked, refocused, and they were gone. "Why talk to me now?" he asked. It felt as though his words had to push through the thickness of the air. The man on the CB was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, a little of the easy drawl flattened by something more serious. "Because we think you might take the other route this time," he said, "and that's new." Marcus glanced at the GPS. Ahead, miles away but still on the line of his path, a tiny freeway interchange icon glowed faintly, an east-south split. One way continued across the desert, the other cut down toward a river valley, a town, and eventually another highway connecting back to his intended course. Dispatch had left it up to him which way to go, so long as he made his delivery window. He had been leaning toward staying on 32 out of habit. "We," Marcus repeated. "All of us," the man said softly. "The ones that kept running this line. The ones that never tried the valley road. The ones that got used to watching that same concrete roll under the tires in the same way, night after night." Something about the rhythm of that description sank under his skin, like a slow-cooling ember. "You saying I'm stuck here?" Marcus asked. The question came out harsher than he intended, a slice of steel in the smooth cab air. Not yet, the voice answered. But the road's got grooves, you know. You run the same pattern enough times, you start to fit into M. Out here, where it's just you and your thoughts and the fog of those patterns can get real deep. The younger echo voice cut in faintly, complaining about trying before and never works. The static folded over it, turning words into suggestions. Marcus thought about all the nights spent on these interstates, the familiar way stations, the same gas stations, same vending machines, the same songs on late-night radio, even years apart. Life as a series of loops, comforting and constricting at once. Out ahead, the red taillights glowed like two small, patient eyes. Behind, the headlights burned steady. "How many of us you think there are?" he asked quietly. A low, rueful chuckle rolled through the speaker. "Hard to say, depends how you count. Every choice a split, every habit a rut, but right here, on this stretch," the voice paused, "feels like three. The one who was too new to question, the one who never did, and the one who's still thinking about it." The fog seemed to listen, thick and still. Outside the cab, the desert had no opinion. It was rock and dust and sparse brush, untroubled by human metaphysics. Inside, the air vibrated gently with the engine's song. The dash lights glowed, and Marcus Klein found himself quietly considering an exit he had barely registered before. The GPS chimed softly, a mild warning that an interchange lay 10 miles ahead. "Why does it matter?" he asked. "Whether I take the valley or stay on 32. "Don't know that it does to the world," the man replied. "Loads get hauled either way. Sun still comes up, but it matters to us, to you, because maybe if you do something different this time, next time," he trailed off. The younger echo finished for him, faint but clear enough. "Next time there won't be 3 trucks in a line, talking to each other through the fog." A mile marker sign slid by in the murk. Marcus caught the white numbers at the last possible second. Mile 187. He remembered a marker like that from years ago, the same half-glimpsed number, the same thin sheen of moisture on the metal, the same tilt of the post. It was as if time had curved back on itself, but subtly, gently, so that only someone looking straight down its length would see. He thought of the night he'd nearly nodded off on this very road, saved only by the sudden, inexplicable urge to pull into a rest area that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He remembered telling that story later, laughing it off as a sugar crash. But what if the instinct had come from somewhere else? Some echo of himself whispering through the long, muffled corridors of the route. "You say you remember me passing through," he said. "You ever remember me talking that split?" The man on the CB was quiet for a long time. The truck rolled on, steady and patient. In the distance ahead, a faint, ghostly structure began to form through the fog, the faint, angled lines of overpass supports, the suggestion of a sign gantry. "No," the voice said at last. "Not once, not yet." Static filled the space after the words like breath. The younger echo muttered something that might have been figures. "And what happens to you if I do?" Marcus asked. The man chuckled, and this time it held something like hope. "Might be I find out what's on the other side of all this fog," he said. "Might be I stop remembering the same night 100 different ways." The idea settled in Marcus's chest with a curious weight. He was not a man given to dramatics. He took pride in being steady, practical, the sort who looked at a problem and saw not destiny but logistics. Yet there was something quietly profound in the notion of giving his own worn-out echo a new view. The interchange grew clearer. The overhead sign emerged, its green face beaded with moisture. The wording flickered into legibility. East 32, Desert Ridge Straight. South 17, River Valley/RYLAND right lane. He had passed that sign more times than he could count. Always stayed straight. Always told himself that the valley route would add time, mess with his sleep schedule, complicate tomorrow's drive. Always felt afterward a faint, irrational sense of having missed a turn in a book he'd already read. He put on his right blinker. In the mirror, the white headlights behind him blinked in unison. Ahead, the red taillights drifted gently toward the fog that hid the right-hand lane. "You seeing this?" he asked into the mic. "We are," the man replied softly. The younger Echo's voice came through, unusually clear for a heartbeat, layered with surprise and something like quiet delight. "He's really doing it." The fog on the right shoulder thinned just enough to reveal the beginning of the off-ramp. The white dashed lines appeared, bright and slick in his headlights. The wheel felt solid under his hands, heavy but responsive. The tanker swayed almost imperceptibly as he guided the rig over. The sensation was so ordinary, just another lane change on just another night, that it threw into relief how much weight his mind had put on it. He took the ramp. The road curved gently away from the straight path, the long gray corridor bending. The incline tilted downward almost immediately, a subtle but distinct drop. The desert edge fell away, and the suggestion of a valley opened ahead, though the fog still veiled its depths. In his side mirror, the interstate he'd left dwindled into mist. He thought, faintly, of a line of 3 trucks continuing on without him, red and white lights marking points on a road that would keep them forever in one another's wake. The CB crackled. For a moment both voices overlapped, older and younger, future and past, layered like tracks on tape. "That's it. Looks different already. Maybe we won't see him next time. Maybe there won't be a next time." Marcus swallowed, the action slow and deliberate. "You boys take care wherever you're running," he said. Silence answered. A deep, rich silence, not the empty kind but the sort that follows when a chorus has sung its last note, and the air itself is still carrying the vibration. Then very faintly, barely a whisper beneath the static, a final phrase reached him. "See you when we don't see you," the older voice said. The younger one laughed, a quick surprised sound. The CB went quiet. Marcus rolled down out of the higher desert toward the valley. The fog changed character as he descended, still present but thinner, more streaked. Gaps appeared where the low glow of farmhouses shone through. The scent in the air shifted from dry dust to something greener, the faint tang of distant water and damp earth. The valley road curved alongside a black ribbon of river he could not quite see, only sense. The hum of his engine echoed differently here, bouncing off unseen canyon walls. The miles unwound beneath him in a new pattern, one he had never drawn with his tires before. Up ahead, tucked against the slope of a low hill, small lights marked the outline of a town. Ryland, population small enough to fit on a single green sign. A gas station canopy gleamed faintly near the highway, its pumps empty at this hour. He passed a rest area he'd never visited, its entry sign simple and unremarkable. Under the sodium glow of its lamps, a row of picnic tables stood in orderly ranks. The tabletops were painted a pale, weathered blue. He drove on, engine singing its familiar, steady note. The fog now only tatters along the low ground. The sky above began to hint at the faintest suggestion of dawn far off in the east. Behind him, somewhere up on the high, straight ribbon of 32, 3 trucks might or might not still be running in parallel, red lights and white lights fixed in a formation they could not quite break. Or perhaps with the simple act of turning a wheel, that quiet corridor of echoes had unraveled, leaving only one truck, on one road, in one night. In the cab, the turtle on the dash watched the new scenery with its unblinking, painted eyes. Marcus glanced at it once, a small smile touching the corner of his mouth, then fixed his gaze on the curve of the valley ahead. The road might still have its mysteries. The fog might still hide its occasional strange reflections. But for this moment, the highway had opened into something he had not yet worn into a groove. The clock ticked forward. The miles this time belonged only to him. Story number 4. The mountain highway wrapped around the ridgeline like a ribbon of dull steel, disappearing and reappearing through sheets of fog that clung to the slopes. It was an old road, scarred with patches and grooves, hemmed in by rock faces on one side and steep drop-offs on the other. Guardrails stood like tired sentries along the edge, their metal darkened by years of rain and road grime. Lena Ortiz guided her truck along the winding grade with the careful touch of someone who knew exactly how quickly a night run in the mountains could go wrong. Her rig, a silver Cascadia pulling a faded blue dry van, grumbled steadily in the low gear she'd chosen for the descent. The exhaust brake whispered. The engine fan kicked on with a soft roar, then settled again. Outside, fog lay in thick bands across the road, each one like a curtain she had to drive through. One moment everything beyond the windshield was a flat gray, sound muffled and distance collapsed. The next, the world opened a little, revealing wet guardrail, slick blacktop, and the vague suggestion of trees crowded close to the shoulder. Her headlights sliced two narrow tunnels through the murk, picking up the reflective glint of road studs and the smeared shine of painted lines. The sky above the fog was invisible, a dark absence pressing down. Somewhere, a moon might have been waning behind the cloud cover, but up here on the ridge, there was only the immediate and the near. The CB, turned low, muttered with occasional voices. A driver a few miles ahead mentioned spotting a deer on the shoulder. Another gave a quick advisory about a slow-moving tanker on the westbound side. Most of the chatter had died away as the fog thickened, replaced by the patient rustle of static. The digital clock on Lena's dash read 2:03 a.m. Her hands were steady on the wheel, fingers loose but responsive. She could feel the subtle drag of gravity on the trailer through each curve, the faint pull to the outside lanes. She eased off the throttle a hair more and watched the speedometer drop to something that felt comfortable for the grade and the weather. It was then she saw the first sign. It appeared out of the fog on the right, a reflective rectangle catching her lights at the last possible second. Way station 2 miles. The letters were stenciled in highway font, white on green, perfectly ordinary. There was nothing remarkable about the sign itself, but its presence made her blink. She didn't remember a way station on the stretch. She had driven this mountain route in both directions more times than she could count. There was a rest area down in the valley, a scenic overlook on the westbound side, and a small town whose orange sodium lamps sometimes glowed faintly below the ridge on clear nights. No scale house, no bypass lane. The CB crackled, then went quiet again. Lena frowned, replaying her mental map. Regulations changed, of course. New stations went up, old ones shut down. She had been running more flatland routes lately, only taking the mountain run when schedules lined up. It was possible she had simply missed a memo. Ahead, the next curve disappeared into gray. 2 minutes later, another sign emerged, this one on a separate post with its own small solar-powered light buzzing above it. Way station 1 mile. All trucks next right. A yellow beacon, half veiled by fog, blinked on and off slowly beneath the words. The directive was clear. This was not one of those open when lit stations. It expected compliance whether or not anyone was home. She let out a slow breath. "Did you know about a scale up here?" she asked into the CB, thumb brushing the mic button. Static answered at first, then a distant voice broke through. "Scale on South Ridge," a man said, his tone noncommittal. "Been there forever. Usually shut this late, though. You see in the open sign." "Got a mile marker," another voice cut in. "You talkin' 'bout the old one or the new one?" Lena considered. "Eastbound I'm a hair past 142, she said, checking the small green digit on the shoulder as she passed it. "Fog's thick as soup. Just got the 1 mile sign." A pause. The first driver spoke again, slower. "Not ringin' any bells for me," he said. "Ain't been no live station on that side since they closed Ridgecrest. That was, 10 years ago." Longer, someone else muttered. Closed it up after that. The rest dissolved into static. Way station 1-2 mile. The next sign seemed to grow out of the fog itself, the letters slightly distorted by beads of water clinging to the panel's surface. Beneath the text, in smaller print, were the words, "When flashing." 2 amber lights, one on each side, pulsed in gentle rhythm. Lena's eyes flicked to the side of the road. Through the gray, a faint, low glow suggested the presence of an upcoming ramp. The fog made judging distance difficult. The sensation of the mountain beside her intensified, the dark mass of rock and trees pressing in on one side, the unseen drop into the ravine on the other. She weighed her options. Blowing past an active way station, even a strange one, was the sort of choice that could bring fines, citations, and long arguments at scales further down the line. If it turned out to be some temporary setup for a construction project, she'd regret ignoring it. Her thumb tapped the wheel once, a small beat of decision. She signaled right. The ramp materialized out of the fog only seconds before she needed it, a gentle diverging lane that curved away from the main highway with a slight uphill slope. Her trailer followed obediently, the tires hissing softly on damp pavement. The fog on the ramp was somehow different, denser, yet laced with a weak, unnatural light, as if bouncing back reflections from hidden fixtures. The lane split, left arrows pointing to trucks, right to passenger vehicles. The car path vanished almost immediately into darkness. The truck lane continued under a row of dim overhead lamps that turned the fog into softly glowing columns. Up ahead through the veil, the outline of a low, boxy building emerged. The way station sat like a squat animal hunched beside the road, flat-roofed and windowed along the front. A tall sign, its edges rusted, rose before it, bearing the words "Way Station" in peeling white over green. A smaller electronic display below read "Open" in a faded amber glow. The place did not look new. Lena rolled her speed down further, letting the truck creep toward the large, bright rectangle painted on the pavement that marked the platform scale. A row of small orange cones stood to one side, bleached and cracked from age. The building's windows were lit from within by a flat, cold, fluorescent light that hummed even through the glass. A red stoplight hung on a wire ahead of the scale, swaying almost imperceptibly in a breeze she couldn't feel. She set her jaw lightly and pulled onto the platform, letting the rig's full length settle with a muted metallic groan. The tires found their places along the painted tracks, the tanker gently rocking once before going still. The red light stayed red. The engine idled, familiar and comforting. The fog beyond the station building pressed close, turning the rest of the world into a featureless wall. Somewhere under the floor of her cab, Lena imagined heavy mechanical levers shifting, sensors humming to life, ancient electronics blinking awake to weigh her down to the last pound. An old intercom speaker, mounted on a pole, crackled suddenly at her window. "Good evening, driver," a voice said. "Please set your brake and remain in the cab." The tone was flat but not unfriendly, the kind of polite weariness heard in toll booth attendants and night shift clerks. It had the faintest hint of an accent that Lena couldn't quite place, and an odd quality to it, like a recording played through an old radio. She set the brake out of habit and habit's sibling, obedience. The truck rocked back a hair as the air released. "Evening," she replied, leaning toward the open window. Fog drifted lazily in, cool against her cheek. "Didn't realize this station was active." "We're always active when we're needed," the voice said. Something metallic clicked on the other end of the line. "Company name." She gave it along with her truck number. There was a pause, accompanied by the faint sound of keys being pressed slowly, one by one. Not a computer keyboard sound, but something older, rounded plastic, deliberate. "Ortiz," the voice said after a moment. "That's you." "Yes, sir." Another pause. In the dim reflection of her side mirror, Lena watched her own face, faint and ghost-like, lit by her dash. The fog outside framed her like a soft border. "You've been over this ridge before," the unseen attendant remarked. "Couple times westbound. Once eastbound, always in a hurry." A chill that wasn't entirely from the night air traced a path down her arms. He could have looked up her company's route history. He could have access to shared data between states. That was possible, logical, but there was something in the certainty of the way he said it that made it feel older. "How's my weight look?" she asked, aiming for brisk and businesslike. A small whirring noise came from somewhere within the scale mechanism, a sound like tape spooling. There was another click, then paper tearing. "You're light tonight," the voice said. 30,000 give or take. Trailer just about half of that. Nothing hazardous in the box." She blinked. He was right. The bill of lading in her side pocket confirmed it. Pallets of box craft supplies. Nothing exciting. Nothing dangerous. "You've been heavier," he continued conversationally. "Remember that time with the steel coils back when you were still trying to prove you could muscle a load like the boys? 42 on the drives, 44 on the tandem. You were sweating that one on the downhill." Her grip tightened on the armrest. She had indeed once dragged an over-enthusiastic load of steel coils over this range, fighting the grade with every fiber of attention she had. It had been years, and she had not stopped at a scale that night. The Ridgecrest station had been closed, its sign dark, its lot empty. "You keep good records," she said carefully. "We try," the voice replied. "Route like this, patterns matter. Wait in, wait out. Who passes, who stops, who listens when they're told to watch their speed in the fog." Outside, the lamps over the scale buzzed faintly. The insects that usually swarmed such lights were absent. The cold and the mist had driven them away. The fog glowed softly, a shifting wall of pale. "Speaking of fog," Lena said, "you folks always open up when the weather's like this." "Only when there's someone who should stop," the attendant answered. "Most nights we just watch you all glide by." There was something in that "we" that pressed gently on her imagination. She glanced toward the scale house. Through the large front window she could see counters, a wall map pinned with colored flags, a corkboard with a few sun-faded posters tacked to it. The room looked empty. No silhouette moved across the glass. No chair creaked. "Is there a problem with my paperwork?" she asked. "Logs are clean, trailers sealed." "No problem," the voice said. "You're fine tonight, mostly." The red light above the scale flickered, then steadied. "Mostly," she repeated, eyebrows lifting. "You've been ridden your brakes a bit on the last few curves," the man replied. "Rotor temps are high. Pads are worn thinner on your passenger side front. Mountain doesn't always give second warnings." Heat crawled up the back of Lena's neck, the slow realization of a mistake she hadn't fully acknowledged yet. She prided herself on her downhill technique, but the fog had her uneasy, and she had been dragging a little. More brake than she should, letting instinct override training. "Got somewhere for me to park it and let him cool?" she asked quietly. "Old inspection lot to your left," he said. "Pull forward when I give you the green. Leave it in neutral, set the brake, and give 20 minutes. You can listen to the radio if you like. We pick up stations they don't send anymore." The casual way he said it grazed her mind like a cold fingertip. The red light flipped to green with a soft, mechanical click. "Scale's clear," he said. "You're good to go, Ortiz, at least for this run." She released the brake and let the truck ease off the platform. The wheels bumped gently as they crossed onto the regular pavement. To the left, under another row of lamps, lay a mostly empty lot, striped with faded white lines and edged by low concrete barriers. She pulled in and parked as instructed, feeling the faint quiver in her brakes as they settled. The fog pooled in the lot's low corners, gathering like pale water in invisible basins. For a moment she considered killing the engine. Instead, she let it idle softly, a heartbeat in the quiet. Her gaze drifted back toward the scale house. Through the window, nothing had changed. The lights inside were steady, their hum a constant in the damp air. On the far wall, a corkboard bore several notices, their edges curled. She could not read the text from here, but she could see the faded shapes of trucks in old photographs, the stylized logos of enforcement agencies that had since redesigned their seals. She picked up the CB mic. "Any of you ever roll through a station up on 142 Ridge?" she asked. Static hissed. The response when it came was fuzzy and distant. "You talkin' 'bout Ridgecrest?" a voice asked. "That place shut down ages back. They tore out the scales last year, just an empty pad and a locked-up shack now." Another voice cut in, older, slower. "Careful what you call shut," he said. "I seen her lit once. Fog night like this. Sign said open, clear as anything. Weighed me, warned me 'bout black ice on the other side. I laughed it off. Hit a patch 10 miles down. Didn't laugh so much then." "Ghost scales," someone muttered, half joking, half not. "Measure more than just your axle weights." Lena let the mic rest in its clip again, heartbeat a touch louder in her ears. On impulse, she reached for the dial on her radio. Not the CB this time, but the old standard AM/FM set in the dash. She spun slowly through the static-filled bands. Most of the stations were dead at this hour, their signals swallowed by terrain and weather. Here and there, thin threads of music or talk surfaced briefly, then vanished. She paused on one that came through clearer than the rest. A soft instrumental melody drifted into the cab, the kind of easy listening track that used to play in late-night diners. It had the faint crackle of something not digital, a recording carried on old airwaves. "Traffic this evening moving smoothly along the ridge," a calm announcer's voice said between songs. "Motorists are reminded that the Ridgecrest Way station will be operating extended hours this weekend due to increased commercial volume. Please watch your speed on the downgrades and respect posted limits." Lena's hand hovered over the knob. The announcer went on to mention a weather front from a year that made her brow twitch. The song that followed was an old one, its chart days long past, but the way the DJ introduced it, referring to it as brand new, did not match the decade she knew. She clicked the radio off. The cab fell back into the quiet hum of her engine. Outside, the fog swirled lazily around the lampposts. The scalehouse window watched her with its blank panes of glass. The open sign threw its dull amber glow onto the wet concrete approach. She sat there, in that little pocket of stillness at the edge of a road she knew too well, feeling the residual heat gradually bleed from her brake drums. In the rearview mirror, her own face looked a fraction paler than usual in the dim dash light, the pupils slightly wider. 20 minutes passed, or something close to it. Time felt different in the lot, stretched thin by the fog and the hum of distant fluorescents. When she tested her brakes again, the pedal feel had returned to normal, no sponginess, no hint of protest. She released the brake and eased the truck back toward the exit. She glanced toward the scalehouse one more time as she rolled by. In the window, for the briefest second, a figure stood. It was only a silhouette, a broad-shouldered shape, cap or hat brim shading the face, one hand resting on the counter. The fluorescent light behind it fuzzed its edges, making it more suggestion than person. Then the fog thickened, crawling across the glass from the outside like slow frost. When it cleared a little, the window was empty again. The intercom stayed quiet as she rejoined the ramp and merged back onto the main highway. The green sign at the end of the ramp, "Thank you for your cooperation," reflected dimly in her mirror for a moment before vanishing into gray. She descended the rest of the grade more carefully than she might have otherwise, letting the engine and gears do most of the work, tapping the brakes only when absolutely necessary. 10 miles down, around a bend where the cliff wall pressed close on the right, she passed the faint shimmer of emergency flares on the shoulder. A car had nudged too close to the guardrail and spun, coming to rest at an awkward angle, its hazard lights blinking dumbly into the fog. A tow truck idled nearby, its operator speaking with a highway patrol officer whose hat brim shone wetly. The road crews had scattered sand and grit across a dark, glassy patch. Ice, thin but dangerous, had formed there, invisible until you were too close. Lena's stomach tightened for a heartbeat, then settled. She kept her wheel steady, her speed controlled, and rolled past without incident. Several hours later, when dawn finally seeped into the sky and burned off the last tatters of fog, she found herself at a truck stop in the valley, coffee in hand, trading stories with another driver over the hood of a parked rig. "Ridgecrest," the other woman said when Lena mentioned the station. "That place is gutted. I saw it in the daylight last month. Windows boarded, scales ripped out. They're talking about turning the lot into a chain tire shop." Lena wiped a line of condensate off her cup with one thumb. "Maybe they're just slow taking down the signs," she suggested. "Maybe," the woman shrugged. "Or maybe the mountain likes to remind folks who's heavier." On her next trip through, weeks later, and under a clear blue afternoon sky, Lena watched carefully as she approached mile 142. The old ramp was still there. The sign for the way station, however, had been bolted flat to its post, the green face turned toward the ground. The scale house sat squat and silent, windows dark, a chain stretched loosely across the entrance. No lights, no hum, no flicker of amber. As she rolled past, her eyes lingered on the roofline. For a moment, just long enough to make her question it later, she thought she saw a thin plume of steam rising from a vent near the back, like breath in cold air. The fog did not return that day. The road ran clear all the way over the ridge. But on nights when mist gathers along the mountain, and the guardrails shine with a fine sheen of damp, some drivers swear that an old sign glows faintly in the gray, letters hovering just above the shoulder. "Way station 1-2 mile, when flashing." And if they follow the glimmering arrow into the fog, sometimes they'll find the ramp, the scale, and the hum of fluorescence waiting for them, ready to measure not just the weight of their loads, but the small, invisible ways they might be pressing their luck against the mountain. Story number 5. The coastal highway clung to the side of the cliffs like a long, dark stitch, sewing land to sea. Far below, invisible in the night, waves shouldered against the rocks in slow, booming intervals, their rhythm carrying up through the fog as a distant, muffled thunder. Somewhere beyond the gray, out past the unseen surf, a foghorn called at regular intervals, 3 low notes that floated in and out of hearing, as if the sound itself were drifting in the mist. Cole Ramirez guided his rig along the narrow eastbound lanes with a familiar mixture of focus and acceptance. The road was what it was, winding, shoulderless in places, deceptively calm when the weather was clear. Tonight it wore a different face. The Pacific fog had rolled in at dusk and never left, thickening as the air cooled until everything beyond his headlights became a blank, luminous wall. His truck, a dark green Volvo with a refrigerated trailer, hummed steadily beneath him. The reefer unit thrummed in a patient counterpoint at the rear, maintaining its own private climate while the world outside turned damp and cold. The cab smelled faintly of diesel, coffee, and the lemony cleaner he'd used on the dash during his layover. A half-finished sandwich sat wrapped in wax paper on the passenger seat, forgotten for the moment. The digital clock on his dash read 1:07 a.m. His wipers ticked back and forth in a slow, metronomic arc, pushing beads of moisture aside only for them to gather again. The headlights found the silver edge of the guardrail, the blurred white of the right side line, the dashed stripe down the center where the asphalt curved. Beyond that thin corridor of visibility, the fog pressed close, a soft, luminous void. The radio at first had been his usual companion, but as he'd climbed along the cliffs, FM stations bled into one another, then dissolved entirely into static. Even the talk channel he sometimes used as a kind of white noise vanished, surrendered to the thicker rock and thicker air. He switched to him out of habit, more out of hope than expectation. The dial slid under his fingers with the easy motion of long practice, the tiny orange indicator sweeping across a scale of numbers. Snatches of sound surfaced briefly, an oldies song warped beyond recognition, a preacher's words tangled with hiss, a faraway ball game swallowed as quickly as it appeared. Then at 11:30 on the dial, the noise smoothed into something else. A soft tone like the chime at the top of an hour rang once. Then a calm voice, male with the precise diction of old radio announcers, slid into the cab. And now, a late-night traffic and conditions update for the coastal corridor, it said. Listeners currently eastbound between mile markers 60 and 80, please be advised. Cole leaned forward a fraction, hand resting lightly on the volume knob. Fog density increasing near the headland bend, the announcer continued. Expect visibility under 1/8 of a mile. Slow your speeds and increase following distances. Report of a disabled vehicle partially blocking the right lane at mile 72 eastbound. Use caution when approaching. The voice had a slightly aged quality, as if it were riding on older equipment. There was a faint hiss underneath, a soft bed of static like distant surf, but the words themselves were clear. Cole glanced at the small green sign that loomed briefly out of the fog on his right. Mile 68. He did quick math in his head. 4 miles to 72. At his current cautious speed, that was a handful of minutes, plenty of time, enough to wonder. He had passed no radio tower. He hadn't seen any roadside signs listing a local AM traffic station the way some metropolitan areas did. And yet here was a voice, speaking about his very stretch of road as if watching it. On impulse, he reached for the CB mic clipped beside the dash. "Anyone else catch that traffic report on 11:30 a.m.?" he asked, thumb on the talk button, eyes still locked on the undulating ribbon of road ahead. "About a breakdown at mile 72. Static flickered back at him, then a dry chuckle broke through. "Negative on that, driver," a woman's voice replied. "Ain't got nothing but white noise down here by 61. You sure you ain't imagining things in that pea soup up there?" "Could be," Cole allowed. "Just sounded real specific is all." "Fog plays tricks," another voice chimed in further away. "Makes you hear yourself think too loud." The CB chatter faded again, absorbed by the damp air. He left the AM station on. The next few miles slid past in a tunnel of gray. His engine's note remained steady, gears holding their own on the gentle grades. Now and then, a reflective post whipped by on the right, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. The smell of the ocean, clean and slightly metallic, seeped into the cab even with the vents closed. At mile 71, he eased off the accelerator a touch more and shifted his attention out farther into the fog, as if he could will the interference to thin. The shapes resolved gradually. First, a diffuse glow, a pair of small, low lights flashing weakly. Then the outline of a compact car half on the shoulder, half in the right lane, its rear end angled awkwardly toward the travel lane. The hazard flashers blinked in a slow, steady rhythm. The driver's side door was closed. No one stood outside. Cole put on his left signal and slid gently into the passing lane, the green line of his trailer following obediently. As he drew even with the stranded vehicle, his own headlights' wash briefly illuminated the car's interior. A figure sat behind the wheel, both hands on the steering wheel, head down as if looking at a phone or a map. He caught only an impression, a pale face stumbling between youth and exhaustion, eyes unfocused in the glow of a screen. The driver never looked up. Cole's truck moved past, the car falling back into the mirror and then into fog. In his side mirror, his own taillights painted a pale red over the wet pavement. He flicked the CB on again. "Radio report on that disabled car at 72 was dead on," he said. "Right lane blocked halfway. Y'all stay sharp when you get there." "Copy that green Volvo," someone answered. "Appreciate the heads up." He glanced at the radio. The announcer's voice had resumed its calm, measured cadence. "Incident at mile 72 eastbound currently contained," it said. "No injuries reported. Tow services en route with an estimated arrival time of 1:42 a.m. Expect minor delays." A strange prickle spread along the back of Cole's neck, part recognition, part unease. It was standard traffic report stuff. There was nothing supernatural about a radio station keeping tabs on highway incidents. But out here, on this fog-bound stretch with no major city nearby, it felt oddly intimate, like someone standing just over his shoulder, narrating his drive. He listened as the broadcast moved on to mention areas of patchy fog further inland, a temporary lane closure on a bridge he'd already crossed hours ago, and a reminder to keep headlights on low beam. The clock ticked to 1:19 a.m. The fog, if anything, grew thicker. It clung to the truck, blurred the reflection of his own markers against the guardrail, deadened the sound of his passing. It was not an aggressive presence, merely insistent, an atmosphere that suggested isolation more than danger. Still, with nothing to see beyond his immediate path and no stars or moon to orient by, it was easy to begin to feel as if the world had shrunk to the size of his cab and the small space his lights carved out. The radio tone chimed again, once, twice. "Update for eastbound traffic approaching mile marker 79, the announcer said. "Developing situation involving unsecured cargo in the left lane. Box truck reported with loose straps and shifting load. Potential road obstruction if not corrected. Caution strongly advised." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. He was perched somewhere around mile 74 now, by his guess. The next marker would confirm it. He waited for the little green sign like a student waits for a test result. Mile 75. He had 4 miles to consider coincidence. Wipers scraped back and forth. The foghorn's low moan reached him again in the intervals between engine noise, an eerie thread woven through the night. He pictured a white box truck up ahead, straps buzzing in the slipstream, tarps billowing. It wasn't hard. He'd seen enough of them over the years, loads not quite as secure as their drivers believed. A pallet shifting, a strap snapping, a trail of boxes strewn across a blind curve. It took very little for an inconvenience to turn into a dangerous mess. His thumb brushed the CB again. "Any of you folks ahead of me see a sloppy box truck, round 79 eastbound?" he asked. Silence, a faint crackle. Then a voice closer this time replied, "Negative, Volvo. I'm just common through 78 now. Nothing but soup out here. No lights but my own." Cole's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Copy," he said. "Keep your eyes peeled. Radio's calling unsecured cargo up there." 10-4, the other answered. "If I run into a mess, I'll holler." The channel fell quiet again. He considered turning the AM station off. Every flick of that calm voice now felt like a finger tapping the back of his mind. But some stubborn corner of his practical side wanted to test it, to see whether this was all just an impressive, well-run service timed with uncanny precision, or something less easy to explain. At mile 78, he saw the lights. Twin red rectangles in the fog, bobbing slightly. A box truck or something like it, running just fast enough that he was only gradually reeling it in. Its taillights were dull, the kind that film over with age and road grit. He closed the distance by degrees, his own headlights slowly revealing more. The square back of a roll-up door, the outline of a faded logo, the faint, silvery blur of straps running over the roofline and down the sides. One of those straps was flapping. It kicked and snapped in the wind, a darker line against the gray. Now and then it smacked the side of the truck with a muted sound he could almost feel. The other straps remained taut, but the looseness of that one was enough to suggest trouble. If it freed completely and whipped off, or if its anchor points gave way, whatever it held in place could shift. Cole slid into the left lane, easing up to the box truck's rear quarter. From here, he could see more detail. The strap's frayed edge whipping, the faint bulge of the tarp-covered load beneath it. The truck itself wavered a bit in its lane, the motion of someone nervous or tired. He gave 2 quick taps on his air horn, short, sharp notes that cut through the muffled world. Nothing. He gave a longer blast, the sound flattening the night for a second, echoing off unseen rock. This time the box truck twitched. Its right brake light flared briefly as the driver's foot touched the pedal in startlement. The vehicle drifted half a foot within its lane, then steadied. In Cole's view, he saw a pale hand appear on the side mirror, rubbing at it as if testing whether the sound was real. Then the truck's left blinker came on. Slowly it eased toward the shoulder. The driver's window rolled down a crack. An arm in a dark hoodie sleeve emerged, waving a tentative thanks. Cole gave one more, shorter horn tap in answer, then pulled ahead, sliding back into the right lane once clear. In his mirror, he saw the box truck come to a full stop on the narrow shoulder, hazard lights beginning to flash. The AM announcer's voice returned. Potential hazard at mile 79 successfully mitigated, it said. Cargo secured before incident occurred. No obstruction at this time. Thank you to the eastbound driver who alerted the operator. A pause, then very faintly, as if from slightly closer to the microphone, almost like an aside. Keep your eyes open, Cole. He did not remember giving his name to anything on that frequency. His hand tightened on the wheel. For a moment, he nearly reached for the radio to twist the knob off. Instead, he adjusted the volume down a notch, enough that the voice became more of a murmur than a presence. The clock read 1:31 a.m. Fog rode the cliffs with unchanging patience. The road curved inland slightly, then back toward the sea. Any sense of geography came from the small shifts in scent. The air saltier near the outer edges, earthier when the highway pressed against the hillside. Once, through a particularly thin veil of mist, he glimpsed a dim scatter of lights far below. A coastal town asleep, its streets empty, its harbor invisible. The tone chimed again. Attention, eastbound heavy vehicles between miles 82 and 90, the announcer said, and something about the way he shaped the words made them feel heavier. Developing major incident reported at mile 88. Initial information indicates multi-vehicle involvement, including at least one tractor-trailer. Eastbound lanes expected to be fully blocked. Significant delays likely. Cole's pulse beat a little louder in his ears. 88 lay ahead not far. He checked the GPS mounted on his dash. The display showed a simple, pale line of highway hugging the contours of the coast. No icons, no warnings. Cell signal, when he glanced at his phone, was reduced to a single, flickering bar that came and went. Advise all eastbound drivers to prepare to slow and stop as they approach mile 88, the voice continued. If possible, consider alternate routes via inland connector roads at mile 79 or mile 84. He had passed 79 already. The inland connector there, a twisting, narrow county road, was not one his company recommended for trucks of his size. At 84, according to his mental map, there was a small interchange leading to a frontage road and eventually to a larger inland highway. He had never taken it. The coastal route had always served him fine. Information subject to change as we receive updates, the announcer finished. Please stand by. The clicking hum of the reefer filled the cab. He picked up the CB again. Any eastbound seeing brake lights around 88, he asked. Traffic report callin' a pileup up there. For a few seconds there was only the sound of static. Then a voice, breathy, strained, broke through. Volvo, this is Blue Peterbilt at 85, it said. Ain't seen nothing yet, but I'm creepin'. This fog's thick. Can't see past my nose. Another voice overlapped it faintly. Negative visual from 82. Still clear far as I can tell. Cole placed the mic back in its clip. The road rolled under him with the same steady rhythm. No glow of brake lights pierced the fog ahead, just the same pale wall. His GPS did not acknowledge any slowdowns. The only alternate road it showed at 84 was, indeed, the small interchange, an angled off-ramp to a thinner line of roadway that snaked inland before rejoining a more substantial highway much later. The AM tone chimed once more. "Update," the voice said. "Incident now forecasted to involve an eastbound green Volvo tractor-trailer if current trajectory and timing remain unchanged. Heavy fog contributing factor." The words sat in the air like a held breath. "Recommended action," the announcer went on, his tone unchanged, the phrase spoken as if part of a script. "Green Volvo operator to divert at mile 84 onto inland connector, reducing risk and bypassing collision site." For a moment it felt as though the cab had shrunk by half. The familiar space, seat, wheel, gauges, small personal items pressed in closer. The fog outside became not just geography but audience, a presence waiting quietly for his choice. He had been driving long enough to distrust overly dramatic thoughts. He breathed in slowly, feeling his chest expand against the belt. In, out. The air tasted faintly of cold plastic and seawater. The rational possibilities lined up. Some sophisticated, localized traffic service using GPS data from his truck to tailor warnings. An uncanny but still explainable layer of tech his company had signed on to without telling him. Old stations being used in new ways. And yet, he thought about the car at 72, the strap on the box truck at 79, the way the announcer had thanked him, the way his name had slipped into the broadcast as if it belonged there. He thought about fog and cliffs, and the simple physics of steel and momentum, when plans met slick pavement and imperfect reactions. Up ahead, the faint, green promise of an exit sign began to form out of the gray. "Exit 84, RYLAND Inland Route, 1 mile." The letters wavered in the mist, then sharpened. He glanced once more at the GPS. The inland route would add distance. It would bend him away from the sea, through a series of unfamiliar junctions, then feed him back onto his planned path eventually. It might cost him an hour, perhaps more. Dispatch would ask why. He could tell them about fog. He could mention a radio report in vague terms. In the end, they would see that his log was legal, his delivery still within window, and they would move on to the next detail of the endless puzzle that was freight. The truck hummed on. He put on his right blinker. The AM station seemed to exhale. "Advisory acknowledged," the announcer said. For the first time, there was a hint, just a trace of warmth at the edges of the words. "Green Volvo diverting at mile 84. Projected collision involvement reduced to 0. Remaining eastbound traffic between 84 and 88 strongly urged to slow and increase caution." The off-ramp bloomed out of the fog to his right, a darker stripe angling away, its arrow slightly distorted by water dripping from the sign. He turned the wheel, the trailer following with a muted sway. The road changed under him at once. The smooth, wide confidence of the highway gave way to a narrower, slightly rougher asphalt. Reflective markers grew sparser. Trees pressed closer on either side, their shapes indistinct smudges in the mist. He climbed inland, the sound of the ocean's distant roar fatting behind him. The smell in the air shifted again, carrying more earth, more wet leaves. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called once, startled by his passing. He drove in silence for several minutes, focused on the new rhythm of the road. Hairpin turns demanded his attention. Short, steep grades flexed the engine. Now and then, the fog parted enough to show him the dark bulk of hills rising around him, their silhouettes sharp against an even darker sky. The AM station continued its broadcast in the background, but the words grew less distinct, like someone speaking from another room. Snippets floated through. Bridge conditions. Light drizzle inland. Remember to keep those low beams on. At some point, without him noticing exactly when, the signal began to fray. The announcer's sentences broke apart, siphoned away by static. The faint bed of hiss grew louder, then thinned. By the time he merged onto the larger inland highway, the station was gone. Spinning the dial back and forth did not find it again. 11:30 held only a soft, uncommitted fuzz. He reached the original highway again an hour later at a different junction, well past mile 88. The fog was still heavy, but thinner here, lying in streaks along low fields rather than wrapped tight around cliffs. As he joined the eastbound lanes, the CB crackled. "Backed up from 88 clear through 91, a weary voice was saying. "Took M an hour to clear that mess. Couple rigs touched bumpers, four-wheelers panicked. Could have been a lot worse, though. No serious injuries, far as I heard." Another driver replied, "What set it off?" "Dunno, maybe nothing. Maybe just too many folks going too fast in the soup." Cole merged into the slow lane, his own speed modest. His trailer's white box cut a clean line through the lingering mist. "Anyone catch that on the radio ahead of time?" someone else asked. "My scanner didn't say nothing till I was right on top of it." "Nah," came the answer. "Only thing I heard tonight was some oldie station cutting in and out. Nothing useful." Later, in a fluorescent-lit diner 2 states away, Cole mentioned the traffic station to a waitress, topping off his mug. 11:30 on the AM dial, she repeated, "out on the cliffs." "That's the one," he said. "Calmest voice I ever heard, telling me about things that hadn't happened yet." She pursed her lips, thinking. "There used to be a station out that way," she said slowly. "Back when my dad was driven, they did nothing but weather and road reports. He swore by M, said they kept him out of more than one mess." "What happened to it?" he asked. She shrugged, the gesture small and a little apologetic. "Budget cuts, I think. Heard something about their traffic plane going down in fog, too. After that, folks said it was bad luck. Station lost its funding a few years later. Tower came down. Nobody took over the frequency." He stirred his coffee absently. Outside the plate glass window, trucks rolled in and out of the lot, their marker lights tracing quiet constellations against the night. When he climbed back into his cab, the smell of salt from the cliffs still seemed to cling faintly to his jacket, though he was hundreds of miles from the sea. On reflex, he spun the radio dial as the engine rumbled awake. Static, empty carriers, a late-night host laughing at his own joke. At 11:30, for a heartbeat, he thought he heard a soft chime. Then it too was gone. On certain nights, when fog curls over the coastal highway and the world shrinks to a pair of headlight beams and a guardrail's pale line, some drivers who drift through the right patch of air at the right moment still report a calm voice cutting through the static. It speaks of mile markers and drifting deer, of lane closures and patches of invisible ice. Sometimes, if you listen carefully, it sounds as though it's speaking only to you. Story number 6. The plains looked endless in the dark, a flat, featureless expanse broken only by the thin streak of highway and the occasional silhouette of a distant grain elevator. On most nights, the sky stretched wide and clear here, a deep bowl pricked with stars, the kind of view that made a driver feel very small and very free at the same time. Tonight the sky was gone. Fog had come in low and heavy after midnight, rolling across the fields like a slow tide. It wasn't the high, drifting mist of river valleys or the clinging soup of coastal air. This was a ground-hugging fog, dense and white, spreading out from the ditches and irrigation canals, swallowing fence lines, fence posts, and even the bases of the far-off wind turbine that turned like ghostly arms in the distance. Dana Price's truck cut through that fog in a steady, humming line. Her rig was a familiar shape in the mirror, a white Kenworth with a company decal half peeled on the door, pulling a refrigerated trailer that whispered softly behind her. The reefer unit's constant thrum was a comforting counterpoint to the engine, a second heartbeat that assured her all that frozen cargo was staying exactly how it should. The cab smelled of coffee, fabric softener from her bunk curtains, and the faint warmth of electronics. Her dashboard glowed in muted greens and ambers, numbers and needles all sitting where they were supposed to. The digital clock read 2:11 a.m. Outside, her headlights reached only a short distance before losing themselves in the gray. The beam caught swirls and eddies in the fog, turning the air itself into something almost solid. The white shoulder line appeared and disappeared in rhythm with the rise and fall of the land. Here and there, the dim forms of winter-dead weeds loomed at the edge of the road, then vanished without ever really resolving. Dana kept her speed conservative, foot light on the throttle, hands easy but attentive on the wheel. This part of the interstate was usually simple, long straight stretches, gentle curves. On a clear day, it felt like driving through a painting. Tonight, it felt like driving through a dream that hadn't quite decided what landscape it wanted to be yet. The CB turned low, chattered every now and then with distant voices. Ahead of her, someone mentioned hydroplaning on a patch left over from a rain earlier in the evening. Behind her, a newer driver asked about the best place to fuel up before the state line. There was a faint hum of camaraderie in the airwaves, a reminder that, even spread out across miles of dark, they were all sharing the same ribbon of road. The first sign of trouble arrived in bright, blinking orange. An electronic message board loomed out of the fog ahead, its pixelated letters shining through the mist with surprising intensity. Accident ahead, I-47 East closed ATMM 302. All traffic exit 294, follow detour. The letters cycled once, then again. Dana eased off the accelerator even more, watching as the sign disappeared behind her, swallowed whole by the fog. She felt the familiar, small tightening in her chest that came with any major disruption to a plan. The CB crackled. "Anyone got eyes on that closure at 302? A voice asked. "Sign says we're all getting bounced off at 294. 10-4, another replied. "State boys got it hard closed. Heard something about a tanker jackknife. Toes out, hazmat out, gonna be a while." "Figures," someone else muttered. "Fog brings out everybody's bad habits." Dana checked her GPS. The small screen showed her creeping blue arrow, the interstate arcing across the plain. Ahead, a red exclamation point had appeared over the line, roughly at mile marker 302. The suggested reroute traced a bend south along a thinner road, then east again, rejoining the main highway much later. She tapped through the menus, zooming in. County roads, 2 lanes, smaller state highways. It was all technically truck legal, but there were question marks the GPS couldn't answer. Bridge weights, low shoulders, narrow turns. She exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. "Could be worse," she said quietly to the empty cab. "Could be snow." The exit for 294 arrived quicker than she expected, leaping out of the fog with only a few seconds' warning. Overhead, another sign blinked its instructions. "All eastbound traffic detour. Next right." Reflective barrels funneled her off the main line. The pavement angled away beneath her, tires hissing on the damp surface. The fog seemed to thicken as she descended slightly, the beams of her headlights turning the world into an even denser, more intimate space. At the base of the ramp, a line of hazard flares burned along the shoulder like a row of small, captive suns. Their red light smeared in the mist, painting the air and the underside of the fog with a dim, eerie glow. A state trooper's cruiser sat with its light bar dark, only the steady glow of its parking lamps visible. A trooper in a reflective jacket stood by the stop sign at the end of the ramp, his gloved hand raised in a lazy but authoritative gesture. His hat brim glistened with tiny beads of moisture. Dana rolled to a stop and cranked down her window a few inches. Damp air flowed in, cool and smelling faintly of wet gravel and faint exhaust. "Even in, ma'am," the trooper said, leaning toward her cab. His face was difficult to read in the diffuse light, features softened by the flickering flare glow. "I-47's closed eastbound at 3:02. All trucks are running the detour. You're gonna hang a right here onto State 17 South, follow the signs. They'll loop you back around." "How bad's the wreck?" she asked. "Bad enough," he replied. "You don't want to be up there. Detour's not so bad, just slow. Fog's thicker off the interstate. Take it easy. Watch for the markers. They got 'em set up at every turn." She nodded, "Appreciated, officer." He slapped the side of her door twice in a friendly, perfunctory way. "Safe travels, driver." She rolled the window up, the outside world becoming instantly quieter. The flares, red smears, became just another part of the shifting fog. Right turn. The detour route led onto a two-lane highway that felt immediately older under her tires. The asphalt was still relatively smooth, but the lane width shrank, the shoulders fell away into ditches, and the comforting rumble strips of the interstate were gone. Reflective paint on the lines was scarcer. Where it did appear, it glowed softly in her headlights like thin bones. The fog showed no sign of lifting. If anything, it hugged the land more tightly here, pooling in low spots, rising in faint layers where colder air settled. A small, temporary sign at the roadside pointed right, its reflective orange arrow bright and simple. "DT0 or right arrow, east." Dana followed it, her GPS's suggestion aligning more or less with the physical instruction. The little blue arrow traced the route cautiously, recalculating only once when she took the advised path instead of the gadget's initial preference. Mile ticked after mile. Houses appeared now and then, isolated farmsteads set back from the road, their outlines barely visible through the fog. A rectangle of yellow light here and there suggested a kitchen where someone still sat up, maybe with a book, maybe with their own worries. Barns loomed blue-black beyond, their roofs lost in the white. She passed a crossroads, a four-way intersection marked only by a blinking red light suspended overhead. The bulb glowed weakly, its halo distorted by the mist. The sign below pointed toward tiny towns she'd never heard of, populations in the low hundreds. Another detour arrow at the opposite side of the intersection pointed her straight ahead. The road began to bend more often, gentle curves skirting what she knew from daylight experience were drainage basins and small creeks. Tonight, all of that geography was hidden, flattened into the same low, gray emptiness. Her GPS blinked once. Then the map rotated, the display stuttering in a way that suggested a lost connection. "Signal lost." The words, in their neat little font, sat at the bottom of the otherwise blank screen. "Well, that's helpful," Dana murmured. She knew better than to panic. This wasn't the first time she'd lost signal in a rural pocket. The detour signs should be enough. The road was, after all, still a road, whatever her electronics had to say about it. Still, a subtle unease crept under her skin, like a draft under a door. Another mile. Another orange detour sign, its arrow now angling left. She obeyed, guiding the Kenworth onto a narrower road that felt more like a county route than a state highway. The pavement seams were more pronounced, patched in irregular rectangles. The shoulder dropped off more sharply into the fog-choked ditches. Fog muffled everything. The sound of her own engine seemed closer, heavier. The small rattles and squeaks of the cab that disappeared on the interstate now became noticeable, the clink of a spoon against an empty thermos, the faint hum of a forgotten phone charger in the lighter socket. She came to another intersection, this one unlit, the crossroad almost indistinguishable from the soil beyond. The only sign was another orange arrow, pointing straight ahead again. She drove on. At some point, it was hard to say when, the temporary sign stopped appearing. She didn't realize it at first. Her mind was busy with the constant, small adjustments of rural night driving, watching for deer whose eyes might suddenly glow in the beams, scanning for the distant wink of a reflector that might indicate a sharp bend, listening with half an ear for a change in the engine that would warn her of something she couldn't yet feel. Minutes stretched. The monotony of the fog and the two-lane worked together, blurring her sense of time and distance. Eventually, a small, quiet warning bell sounded in the back of her mind. She scanned the roadside carefully at the next slight bend. No arrow, just the old, weather-beaten signs marking a gravel road's county designation, its numbers meaningless without a map to cross-reference. The white, hollow-cheeked face of a speed limit sign, a battered advert for a local feed store. Her jaw tightened a fraction. "All right," she said to the air. "Where'd you go?" She slowed, watching the odometer, watching for any hint of the detour's reassurance. Tractor tracks marked a faint trail into a field, disappearing in a smear of gray. A lone windbreak of trees stood black and skeletal along one property line, branches dripping with beads of water that caught and scattered her headlights. The next crossroads came and went with only the county road markers and an old, bullet-pocked sign pointing toward a lake she'd never seen. No detour arrows, no orange. She pulled the truck gently to a stop on the wide enough patch of shoulder she could find, mindful of the ditches. The engine settled into its idle, the cooling fan ticking softly. The fog felt thicker when she stopped, as if her motion had been keeping it at bay. Now it swirled more lazily past the glass, searching for new patterns. Dana took a breath, held it, let it out slowly. This was not, strictly speaking, a dangerous situation. She was on pavement, not stuck on a dirt track. The weather was damp but not icy. Her fuel reserves were good. Her hours were fine. It was simply disorienting. She glanced again at the GPS. Still nothing. The little arrow sat alone on a blank grid, an orphan with no names to cling to. Her paper atlas, tucked into the compartment beside her seat, would have answers. She reached for it, flipped on the overhead light, and spread it open carefully on the steering wheel. Thin lines crisscrossed the page, annotated with route numbers and towns. But without clearly marked mileposts or recent landmarks, even a seasoned driver could find the maze confusing. The detour signs had, until recently, been doing the work of thinking for her. She traced possibilities with her fingertip, measuring rough distances by feel. She could guess where she was, approximate her lost route. But in the dark, in the fog, on unfamiliar rural roads, guesses weren't good enough. Lifting her head, she peered out through the windshield once more, as if hoping that a sign might present itself out of sheer embarrassment at having vanished. Something else did. 2 points of amber light appeared in the fog ahead, low and small at first. They hovered, unmoving, then brightened as the unseen vehicle approached. Dana turned off her overhead light, plunging the cab back into a more comfortable, instrument-lit dimness. The fog outside brightened in rhythm with the approaching lamps. A truck, she thought, but not a big one. The spacing didn't match that of a tractor, more like a pickup. The amber lights fluttered in a way she recognized, a rotating beacon on a roof, perhaps cutting through mist in a soft, strobe-like pattern. She watched as the vehicle drew closer. A white pickup truck emerged, its shape resolving slowly from the gray. A light bar glowed dimly on its roof, the twin rotating beacons casting lazy arcs of amber through the fog. On the tailgate, black block letters spelled out words she couldn't make out at first. The pickup rolled past her slowly, then braked, its red taillights flaring. It came to a stop on the shoulder just ahead, entirely on the pavement, as if aware of the deep ditches. The fog closed around it, softening its edges, but the bold letters on the tailgate were now visible in the glow of her headlights. "Pilot car, follow me." The phrase was stenciled in slightly faded paint on a yellow board bolted to the back. Dana blinked once slowly, as her brain took in and sorted the sight. A pilot car, the kind used for oversized loads or during construction detours, out here in the fog exactly when she needed direction. She reached for the CB. Pilot car sitting at the side of County 14. And whatever this is, she said, half to herself, half to anyone listening, that you runnin' the detour for I-47. No reply came over the speaker, only the soft crackle of distant conversations out of range. Ahead, the pickup's brake lights blinked twice. The driver's side mirror angled slightly, as if someone inside were looking back at her. The amber beacons spun once more, their glow reflecting faintly off the wet road and the damp metal of her bumper. Then the pickup eased forward, rolling slowly down the road at a speed that suggested it was not in a hurry at all. The words on the tailgate bobbed gently in her view. "Pilot car, follow me." "Right timing," she murmured. "I'll give you that." She hesitated only a moment longer. It wasn't in her nature to blindly trust just anyone on a back road at night. But the choice, when she laid it out for herself, was simple. Follow a vehicle that clearly knew the route and was moving under official-sounding pretenses, or venture on a lone with no signage, no GPS, and no clear sense of where the next safe turn lay. She released the brake, let the truck idle forward, and settled in a safe distance behind the pickup. The detour resumed. The pilot car kept a consistent, unhurried pace, hovering a few miles per hour under what felt comfortable on the narrow road. Its amber lights rotated with hypnotic regularity, painting the fog in warm, slow-moving bands. Dana matched its speed, watching for every twitch of its wheels, every subtle swerve to avoid potholes invisible to her until she was almost upon them. The pickup's license plate was an old style, familiar and yet not quite current. The color scheme was from several years back, the embossed numbers slightly corroded at the edges, road salt having done its quiet work. The state name arched above in a font the DMV had since updated. On its doors, in weathered, reflective letters, the name of the State Transportation Department was stenciled. The design was one she remembered from her early years on the road, a crest and line work that had been retired for a newer, cleaner logo. Every now and then, she thought she could see the outline of a figure in the driver's seat when the pickup passed under a lone, fog-blurred security light from a farmhouse. A hat brim, a shoulder in a high-visibility vest, hands resting lightly on the wheel. But the details were always obscured by reflections, by distance, by the way the fog breathed between them. At the first turn, the pilot car clicked on its right indicator and began to slow well in advance. The road they turned onto was narrower still, the painted lines more worn. A small, reflective arrow for the detour perched on a stake at the corner, half camouflaged by the mist. "Guess you're legit," Dana said under her breath. She followed. The landscape around them, insofar as she could sense it, shifted gradually. The straight fields gave way to a gentle roll in the land. She felt the truck climb a little, then descend. A stand of trees loomed suddenly close on one side, their trunks pale in her lights like columns in some half-seen hall. Somewhere in the dark, unseen, the creak of a windmill drifted in thinly. Now and then a small farmhouse would appear, a square of warm light in the fog, a porch with a chair left out, a pickup parked crooked in the yard. Once, they passed a barn so close to the road that she could see hay bales stacked just inside its open door, their edges softened by shadow. The pilot car's beacons were a constant reassurance ahead. A little island of intention, in a landscape that otherwise seemed to be made only of suggestion. At an unmarked T-intersection, the pickup turned left without hesitation. Dana checked instinctively for a sign of her own, any arrow, any instruction, but there was nothing. Had she come to that lonely crossroad alone, she might have spent long minutes idling there, atlas open, trying to decide. "Hope you know where you're going," she said softly, watching the tailgate's stenciled promise, "Follow me." Her GPS, after an extended sulk, blinked back to life. The map that reappeared, however, did not match her expectation. According to the little display, her truck was not on any marked road at all. The screen showed the surrounding highway network in their pale lines, the thick stripe of I-47 sitting static above and to the north. But her arrow floated on a blank patch of gray grid, as if she were driving across bare earth. She tapped the side of the unit lightly. The arrow wobbled a fraction, then continued to trace its path along invisible lines. Ahead, the pilot car took another turn, this one up a short incline. For a brief moment, the fog thinned on their left, and Dana caught a glimpse of something off in the distance below. A faint, scattered pattern of sodium vapor lights, low and yellow, like a sleeping town nestled in a bowl. Then the mist folded back over the view, the world beyond the road closing again. The hum of her tires on this older pavement sounded different than it did on the interstate. A slightly higher pitch, the faint crackle of small aggregate under rubber. The steering wheel vibrated minutely with each patch and repair they crossed. Love of routine had brought her to this career. The same routes, the same truck, the same quiet pride in delivering a load on time. But nights like this reminded her that no matter how known a road felt, it always held the capacity for surprise. She glanced once more at the pilot car's tailgate. The yellow board rattled slightly with each bump. In the corner, a small, rectangular magnet clung stubbornly, a logo for a radio station so old she dimly remembered her parents mentioning it. Its frequency markings had long since been usurped by newer outlets, their playlists now occupying those numbers. On impulse, she reached to her own radio and flicked it over to AM. Most of what came through was static, hisses and low growls of interference. She turned the knob slowly, eyes always returning to the glowing beacons ahead. At one point, she landed on a station playing country music from decades back, the singer's voice drifting in and out like someone walking through adjoining rooms. Behind it, faintly, she thought she heard a traffic report. Old phrasing, old road numbers. She clicked the radio off again. The present was enough to manage. After what might have been half an hour or might have been only 15 minutes, the fog and the lack of landmarks made time deceptive. They crested a low rise. The road dipped, curved right, and then straightened. Out in front of them, as if summoned, a familiar sight rose from the mist. Green overhead signs, high. Sodium lights, the unmistakable, broader shape of an interstate underpass. Her chest loosened. The pilot car's brake lights flared once as it slowed. They passed a small, battered sign on the side of the approaching ramp, TO I-47 East. The white-on-green lettering was slightly askew, as if someone had straightened it by hand one too many times. The pickup took the ramp without ceremony, its amber lights still revolving. Dana followed, heart rate dropping incrementally with each yard of familiar concrete under her. At the top of the ramp, they merged onto the interstate. Traffic was light. 2 sets of taillights glowed far ahead. In her mirror, only a pair of distant pinprick headlamps suggested another vehicle climbing the grade behind her. The fog, while still present, seemed thinner up here on the main line, perhaps disrupted by broader movement, perhaps merely different by some quirk of height and wind. The pilot car moved into the right lane and rolled along at the posted speed for a brief stretch. Then, just before an overpass crossed above, it flicked on its right blinker and eased onto the shoulder. Dana slowed slightly as she came alongside. In the cab of the pickup, through the partly fogged side window, she glimpsed a figure, broad-shouldered, wearing a high-vis jacket whose stripes caught and broke her headlights, a cap pulled low. The driver's face was turned toward the windshield, expression unreadable in the glow. She lifted a hand in a brief, grateful wave. The pickup's driver did not respond in kind. Instead, the amber beacons on the roof dipped once, as if someone had toggled them off and then immediately on again. A small courtesy bow of light. She drove on. In her mirror, she watched as the pilot car pulled forward slowly, then turned onto an unmarked access road that ran parallel to the highway before curving away toward the fields. Its taillights dwindled, then disappeared entirely into the fog. The GPS at last accepted this new reality. The little blue arrow snapped into place on the fat, reassuring line of I-47. Ahead, somewhere miles down the road, a small icon still marked the closure at mile 302. But Dana was now well beyond the 30-numbered mile markers. The worst of it lay behind her, unseen. She glanced at the digital clock, 3:03 a.m. Her schedule would need adjusting. She'd lost some time, but the detour, strange as it had felt, had done what detours were meant to do. It had brought her around the obstacle back onto known ground. A while later, at a truck stop with a long, low building and the tired glow of a 24-hour sign, she parked among the other rigs and went inside for a cup of coffee and a place to stretch her legs. The air in the diner area was warm and smelled of hash browns, grease, and brewed coffee that had been sitting just a bit too long on the warmer. A few drivers sat scattered among the booths, shoulders hunched, hats tipped back, their expressions that particular mix of fatigue and permanent patience. She slid into a booth with her mug, the chocolate-brown vinyl squeaking softly under her. 2 tables over, a pair of older drivers were talking about the night's closure. "Pile-up was something fierce, they say," one murmured. "Fog that thick, you hit one brake light wrong and you're part of the sculpture." "Detour wasn't too bad, though," the other replied. "Ran it about an hour ago. They had signs all the way. Almost missed one at that 4-way, but I caught it." "Yeah," Dana asked, leaning over slightly. "You didn't lose the arrows halfway." The man looked over at her, eyebrows lifting. "Nah, they had 'em tied to every post, little reflective buggers. Went south, east, north again, then back to the 47. Pain, but not confusing." Dana sipped her coffee slowly. "I must have missed a turn then," she said. "Lost the signs somewhere after a T-intersection. Found a pilot car instead." The men exchanged a quick glance. "Pilot car," one repeated. "Out there tonight." "White pickup," she said. "Old dot logo on the door, amber bar on top. Had a follow me sign on the tailgate. Led me right back to the interstate near 320. The first driver shook his head. "They pulled them night escorts years ago," he said. "Budget slashing. Now it's follow the arrows and good luck to you. If you found a pilot car, you were luckier than most." "Maybe they brought M back just for the wreck," Dana suggested. "Maybe," he said noncommittally, turning back to his plate. Later, while waiting in line at the register, she happened to glance at a faded bulletin board by the door. Among the clutter of business cards, handwritten notices, and weather-updated printouts, a yellowed photograph caught her attention. It showed a white pickup truck with a roof-mounted amber light bar and a yellow pilot car, Follow ME board fixed to the tailgate. The logo on the door matched what she'd seen just hours earlier. Below the photo, a caption in curling ink read, "In memory of Frank Red, Hanley. Dedicated escort driver, State Dot. 1978-2009. Kept a lot of FOLKS out of DITCHES. Someone at some later date had taped a little paper cutout of a tiny orange arrow next to the photograph, its point aimed, ironically, toward the door. Outside, the fog had thinned a bit around the truck stop, rising into kinder wisps that trailed along the lot between the parked rigs. The wind turbines on the horizon revealed their shapes, pale giants turning slowly in the dim pre-dawn light. Back in her cab, Dana settled into her seat, hand resting on the familiar wheel. She glanced at the GPS, at the steady line of interstate ahead. Then, for no particular reason, she reached down and checked her map again, tracing the route she believed she'd taken with a fingertip. There was no direct connection on the paper between the county road where she'd stopped and the on-ramp where she'd rejoined. There were roads, yes, and old farm tracks, and a service lane marked faintly near the overpass, but the path as she remembered it didn't quite exist in ink. The fog outside the windshield moved in delicate shreds now, no longer a wall but a curtain pulled partly aside. She started the engine. The Kenworth came alive with its familiar vibrations. Her trailer settled into its harness. Somewhere far off across the fields, a train horn called once, long and low. As she pulled back onto the interstate, the memory of the pilot car's amber lights hovered briefly at the edge of her thoughts. They had been a small, steady glow in a night that had briefly felt like it might lose its way. Whether they belonged to a budget line item, a glitch in time, or simply a weary escort driver doing one last unofficial run, she couldn't say. All she knew was that she had followed. The highway accepted her back without comment, its lanes stretching out into whatever fog and clarity waited ahead. Story number 7. Long before dawn. The interstate slipped over the rolling hills like a dark ribbon, its twin lanes curving gently through bare winter fields and stands of leafless trees. The sky above the hills was a dull, unbroken slate. No moon, no stars, just a soft, lightless ceiling pressing down. From the low ground, a slow, patient fog rose up, threading itself through the hollows, wrapping around fence posts, licking at the pavement in pale, restless tongues. Jonah Reeves watched the world shrink, mile by mile. His rig, a black International with a white box trailer, pushed through that gray sea in a steady, measured way. The headlights cast twin cones of hazy light that reached only a short distance before dissolving into opaque mist. The reflective edges of the road signs flashed out of the fog as if surprised to be seen, then slid past and vanished. Inside the cab, the air was warm, scented faintly with coffee, diesel, and the clean, slightly artificial smell of the dashboard cleaner he'd used in a fit of restlessness at his last break. The instrument panel glowed a soft amber. The digital clock on the dash read 2:38. The CB murmured low with distant voices, words broken by hills and atmospheric interference. He hoped the fog might let up as he climbed into the high country. Instead, it thickened. It moved in slow, horizontal layers, hanging just above the ground in places and pressing right up against the windshield in others, like breath on glass. An overhead message board appeared ahead, its amber letters startlingly bright in the murk. Fog advisory, next 30 miles. I-74 East closed ahead ATMM 211, rockslide. Follow alt route, exit 204 to US 19. The words cycled twice, then were swallowed by fog. Jonah blew out a long breath through his teeth. "All right," he said quietly, more as a way of keeping his mind company than anything else. "Old road it is." He'd taken that alternate route once, years ago, riding shotgun with his father in an aging Kenworth. Back then, the new interstate hadn't been fully open, and his dad had preferred the old highway anyway, insisting it had character. Jonah remembered the way the two-lane had curled around the sides of the mountains, how the guardrails had seemed a little too flimsy, how the radio had gone oddly quiet through one stretch. His father had called that part the Quiet Miles. The memory rose up like something called out of deep water. Jonah hadn't thought about that name in years. He could hear his father's voice in the back of his mind, warm and raspy from too much coffee and too many cigarettes. "You'll know when you're on 'em, kiddo. Engine sounds different, like the world's holding its breath." He signaled right as the sign for exit 204 loomed through the fog. The ramp sloped gently down and away from the interstate. The fog pooled thicker along the shoulder, making the guardrail below look as if it were slowly drowning. A small green sign announced US 19 Alt East, Quiet Ridge/Holland in reflective letters dulled by moisture. At the base of the ramp, a second, more modest message board flickered in the mist. Its amber bulb spelled out a simpler warning. "Fog ahead, quiet miles 4146. Use extreme caution." The phrasing tugged at something in him. Quiet miles. The same words his father had used, but now printed in sterile highway font. He turned onto US 19. The change was immediate. The interstate's broad, forgiving lanes gave way to a narrower, more intimate road that wound between the hills. The shoulders shrank. The guardrails where they appeared were older, their metal dulled and slightly buckled in places. Trees crowded closer, their bare branches reaching into the fog like thin fingers. The engine note under his feet shifted subtly as the pavement's texture changed. The deep, smooth thrumming of highway asphalt turned into a slightly higher, more granular sound. Tires hummed differently. Small pebbles hissed now and then under the weight of the truck. The fog thickened into a continuous curtain. His world contracted to the patch of glowing pavement in front of his bumper and the ghostly white of the right-hand line. The left lane, when there was one, was often little more than an implication, the center lines blurred and swallowed by mist. The CB, which had been a background murmur of chatter, began to fade. Voices grew fainter, washed out by static. A driver somewhere behind him was complaining about the rockslide closure. Another was making half-joking comments about haunted detours. Their words thinned until they were just syllables, then just sound, then not even that. He reached for the squelch and volume knobs, turning them carefully. The meter flickered. No chain. "You still with me, kiddo?" For a second, his heart jumped. Then he realized the voice had come not from the CB, but from the back of his memory, from a night when he was young and small in the passenger seat, trying not to fall asleep. His father's hand had been light on the wheel, his profile cut sharp against the instrument panel glow. Outside, fog had pounded gently against the windows. "These are the quiet miles," his dad had said then, his tone soft, almost reverent. "Watch how everything goes hush, like something big is listening." Now, years later, Jonah caught himself listening too. At first, it was just an impression. The engine sounded dampened. Not quiet exactly, but muffled, like a familiar song heard through a wall. The usual vibrations in the steering wheel and pedals were there, but softened, as though padded. The wipers, which had squeaked faintly on each pass, seemed to slide in near silence across the glass. He realized, with a small start, that he could no longer hear the faint rattle of the loose change in his cup holder. The truck still moved. The gauges still read as they should. The reefer unit on the trailer still cycled with its tiny flicker on the indicator. But all of it felt as if someone had turned down the volume on the world outside, leaving him in a cab of thickened, cotton-wrapped sound. The digital clock on the dash read 2:51 a.m. He watched it for a moment, waiting for it to twitch forward to 2:52. It didn't. He frowned, checked the dash lights, the battery gauge. Everything else glowed and ticked as expected. Maybe the clock had just caught a hiccup, a minor electronic hesitation. He kept driving. Signs emerged from the fog with little warning. Quiet mile 41. The green marker stood at the edge of his headlights, its white numbers beating with moisture. The fog swirled around its post in slow, lazy eddies. He passed it, and the sense of quiet deepened. Even the thump of expansion joints across a small bridge came to him as a kind of memory of a sound, instead of the sound itself. His breathing seemed louder in his own ears. The soft shift of denim when he adjusted his leg position was oddly distinct. He tightened his grip on the wheel just a fraction, then consciously loosened it again. "You're fine," he told himself. "Road's fine, just fog and a weird acoustic pocket." The cab air felt cooler, though he hadn't touched the climate controls. A thin, familiar scent drifted in where no open vent justified it. Stale cigarette smoke, the kind that had seeped into fabric over years, mixed with the faint tang of an aftershave Jonah hadn't smelled since his 20s. His throat constricted for a heartbeat. The smell brought back the worn upholstery of his father's old truck, the frayed edge of the curtain he used to tug on when he was small, the way his dad would lean slightly to one side in his seat when deep in thought. He resisted the urge to glance at the passenger side immediately. When he did let his eyes slide over, He did it slowly, as if any quick motion might break something delicate. The seat was empty. The fabric was the same gray he'd seen when he'd climbed in at the last fuel stop, faintly indented by old use, a small tear near the seam on the outer edge. The map pocket held a folded safety vest and a dog-eared magazine. The seat belt hung at its usual angle. But the cushion seemed to dip slightly more than it should have, just a fraction, as though someone were seated there, weight pressing down invisibly. He blinked. The impression didn't quite go away. He put his eyes back on the road, knuckles pale against the wheel. The right-hand line slid beneath him like a ghostly guide rope. Trees loomed briefly on either side, their trunks white in his lights, then retreated. Occasionally, a rock face pressed close, its damp surface shining dully. Then another hollow, another stand of trees. Quiet mile 42. The marker appeared, then slipped past. The fog thickened momentarily into a solid, white wall. His world shrank to the length of his hood. The guardrail disappeared. The sense of drop on one side and hill on the other bled into one uniform, featureless mass. He eased off the throttle slightly, letting the truck lose a few miles per hour. The engine's hum dropped in pitch, but the sound stayed strangely distant. "Don't ride the brake through here. You remember that, right?" The voice was not in the cab, not in the speakers. It seemed to arrive from some angle just behind his ear and deep inside his chest, threading through the layers of quiet with practiced ease. Jonah's lips parted. His father had told him that years ago on this same stretch. Night like this, soup thick enough to eat with a spoon, you let the engine do the work. Brake too much, you'll cook 'em before the grade's done. He hadn't been thinking about braking, but he realized with a small, embarrassed jolt that his foot was resting a little too close to the pedal, ready to stamp at the first sign of trouble. He slid it back, flexed his ankle, felt his heart rate tick up and then back down. "Okay," he said softly. Whether he was answering his memory or something else, he wasn't entirely sure. A darker shape loomed ahead in the fog, blocking a portion of the pale. Smear of road. For one confused instant, his mind supplied absurd images. A building, a wall, some impossible obstacle. Then the shape resolved into something more mundane and more dangerous. A downed tree sprawled partially into the lane, its wet bark glowing faintly in his headlights. One thick limb had snapped, and now reached across 3/4 of the right lane like a low barrier. Smaller branches scattered beyond. There was no time for careful deliberation, just the compressed instinct of a driver who'd spent years reading roads. He eased left, hugging the center line, trusting that no one would be barreling the other way through the fog. The truck's right side tires rolled over smaller branches with a muted, almost inaudible crunch, a feeling more than a sound. The big limb slid by just inches outside his door. He exhaled when his trailer cleared it. Only then did he catch the faint shimmer of broken glass further ahead, the angled glint of a sedan's taillight half buried in the ditch, its hazard lights long since dead. "Too late for them," his father had said once about another car on another road. "Not too late for you." Jonah's hands shook just a little. The rest of him was steady. Quiet mile 43. The marker's numbers blurred slightly as he passed it. His dash clock still read 2:51 a.m. He tapped its plastic face once with his knuckle. The numbers stayed put, stubbornly indifferent. "How long we gonna sit here, huh?" he muttered. The cab pressed in with its hushed sound. The heater's fan whirred softly, but even that was muted, like a seashell pressed halfway to his ear. For a moment, a brief, flickering instant, he felt the subtle sensation of another weight settling more fully into the passenger seat. The air seemed to dimple, the fabric fibers giving way. The scent of cigarette smoke and aftershave intensified, wrapped around him like a worn jacket. He didn't look. He knew, without seeing, how his father would be sitting if he were there. one elbow on the door armrest, one hand loose on his thigh or the dash, shoulder leaning a bit toward the steering wheel as if he could steer by sheer proximity. "Eyes up, kiddo." A curve approached, its angle hard to judge through the homogeneous gray. The right guardrail reappeared, slick with moisture, angling away. Beyond it, nothing but white. He traced the turn with patience, keeping just enough speed to feel the truck's center of gravity, not enough to let momentum do more than nudge. A faint, dark break in the fog ahead teased the possibility of a turnout. The vague shape of a gravel pad, a gap in the guardrail, the outline of a brown information sign. He registered it, stored it, noted it as a possible place to pull off if the strange hush became too much. Quiet mile 44. The air felt denser here, as if each inch of progress were pushing through layers of something unseen. He realized he hadn't heard his own breathing in a few seconds. Not really. It was as if that, too, had been swallowed, leaving only his awareness of breath but not the sound. The foghorn call of his engine brake, when he tested it gently, came back to him as barely more than a suggestion, a ghost of its usual self. "Leave that off," his father's voice murmured, gentle but firm. "No sense advertising yourself to the rocks. Let the gears do most of it. You know how." He clicked the brake switch back off. The grade eased a little, then steepened again. Signs warning of a runaway truck ramp faded in and out at the edge of his vision. Time, suspended on the dash clock, became slippery in his mind. Had he been in the quiet miles 5 minutes, 15, longer? He thought of those long-ago nights, curled under a blanket in the bunk, while his father rolled through some corner of the country Jonah couldn't even name. The feel of the truck moving, the way conversation would fade into a steady, comforting drone, the knowledge that even if the world outside had teeth, his father had both hands on the wheel and an eye on the weather. Now his own hands held the wheel, but the sensation of not being alone rode lightly beside him, neither pressing nor insistent, just present. Quiet mile 45. The marker emerged, hung in the beams, then slid away. Somewhere ahead, very faint through the thick air, he thought he saw a glow warmer than his own headlights, more diffuse. The kind of light that might come from a cluster of street lamps, softened by distance and fog. The road straightened gradually. The guardrail on the drop-off side leveled, no longer flirting with sharp ravines. Trees thinned. The sense of hovering along a cliff edge eased. The dash clock flickered. 2:52 a.m. The small change felt like a door clicking open. Sound began to creep back into the world in increments. First, the soft slap of the wipers reclaimed their usual presence. Then the loose change in the cup holder chimed lightly as the truck hit a small dip. The engine's note rose in volume, reclaiming its rightful place in his awareness. The CB hissed once, then grew a voice, then several. Someone was laughing too loudly. Another driver was complaining about a slow mover in the right lane. A scratchy country song faded in and out at the edge of reception. Quiet mile 46. The sign stood like a bookend at the side of the road. Beyond it, the fog began to lift, not entirely, but in ribbons, revealing the faint, blurred silhouettes of more distant hills. A low cluster of lights grew clearer, the glow of a truck stop huddled in a valley notch. The familiar hum of the world returned in full. Jonah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders dropped half an inch, tension unwinding. The seat beside him felt normal again. The cushion's slight dip evened out on his peripheral vision. The ghost of smoke and aftershave retreated, leaving only the neutral, slightly stale smell of truck upholstery and coffee. "Thanks," he said into the quiet of the cab. It felt silly and unformed and necessary all at once. He took the exit for the truck stop on a quiet, simple impulse, not out of necessity, but out of a wish to stand on still ground for a minute, to feel the night air without glass in between. The place was older, its sign half-lit, the paint on its name faded. A few rigs sat scattered across the lot, engines idling low, marker lights winking like sleepy eyes. Sodium lamps cast pools of orange light onto wet pavement, turning puddles into shallow, glowing coins. He parked along the outer edge, set his brake, and listened to the engine tick as it cooled. Outside, the fog was gentler here, hanging in low, shallow banks instead of pushing in a solid wall. It carried the smells of damp asphalt, spilled diesel, and a faint, greasy hint of fryer oil from the diner. Inside the building, the warm air felt almost heavy after the chilled hush of the quiet miles. The overhead lights hummed. A TV in the corner of the small dining area played some late-night program with the sound down, captions scrolling lazily. A couple of drivers sat alone at tables, hunched over their plates, the clink of forks on ceramic the only sharp sound. Near the restrooms, a bulletin board held the usual clutter. Notices about tire chains, a flyer for a missing dog, a handwritten ad offering light mechanical work. In the middle of the board hung a framed photograph, slightly crooked. It showed a man in his early 40s, wearing a denim jacket and a trucker cap, leaning against the fender of an older Kenworth. The truck behind him bore an out-of-date company logo. His arm rested casually on the hood, his smile easy, eyes crinkled at the corners. Jonah didn't need to read the nameplate below to know who it was. CALVINREVES, in memory. 1962, 1992. Always watching out on the quiet miles. A small arrangement of artificial flowers drooped beneath the frame, their colors faded. Someone had tucked a tiny toy truck onto the ledge of the frame, its paint chipped. A woman wiping down the nearby counter noticed his gaze. "You know him?" she asked, voice low to match the late hour. Jonah cleared his throat gently. "Yeah," he said, "I did." "Good man," she said, nodding toward the photo. "Folks around here still talk about him. Wreck on the quiet miles way back. Fog night. They say he got his rig in between a minivan and a runaway load. Took the worst of it himself, so the family walked away." Her eyes softened. State put up those quiet miles signs after as a kind of warning, and a thank you, I suppose. Jonah stared at the photo. The image had been taken years before that night, he could tell. There was more color in his father's hair, less in the wrinkles around his eyes. But the way he stood, the tilt of his cap, the line of his jaw, it was all exactly as Jonah remembered. Exactly as he'd half seen out of the corner of his eye in the passenger seat not half an hour ago. "Some drivers say they feel him out there," the woman went on, wiping an imaginary spot on the counter. "Hear a voice telling 'em to easy off the brakes or to watch the shoulder. Could just be stories, but most of the folks who say it, they're the ones who made it through something they shouldn't have." Jonah's hand tightened around the coffee cup he'd only just realized he was holding. "Stories, huh?" he said softly. Outside the window, fog drifted lazily across the lamps, softening their glow. A truck rolled past slow in the lot, its engine a low, familiar rumble, every piston and valve note sharp to his ears now that the muffled stretch was behind him. Later, when he climbed back into his own cab and set his hands on the wheel again, he glanced once at the empty passenger seat. The cushion was just a cushion, the fabric only fabric. Still, he rested his fingers lightly on the outer edge, as if patting a shoulder. On the dash, the clock read 3:17 a.m. He checked his log, did the math, and realized that the quiet miles, for all the distance they covered, barely made a ripple in his recorded time. A strange compression, as though something had given him a handful of minutes back. Fog thinned gradually as he rejoined the interstate, then broke apart entirely, leaving only cold, clear air and stars winking back into view overhead. The road ahead stretched on, ordinary and strange as ever. Behind him, tucked into a fold of hills, the old highway curved quietly through its miles of hush. On certain nights, When the fog rises from the hollows and the world seems to lean in and listen, a driver easing onto that stretch might feel the volume of their engine turn down, the noise of the world soften, and a presence settle easy in the seat beside them. Not to scare, just to steer them lightly toward morning.